Chapter 198. In the darkness, he slowly opened his eyes. The surroundings were dark. Then, not far in front of him, a faint light slowly lit up, like a weak candle flame in the night, quietly burning. He silently looked over there. That ray of light was a light purple, then it turned green, and then it slowly turned dark green. Like this, it kept changing, flickering with all kinds of colors. It was very beautiful. Gigi. Suddenly, beside him, Xiao Hui's low voice was heard, as if because it was in the darkness, even its voice did not dare to be too loud. Ghostly turned his head, as expected against that faint light. He saw the monkey Xiao Hui crouching beside him. He smiled, subconsciously clenched his teeth, wanted to endure the pain and sit up first, to take a clear look at the surroundings before doing anything. Unexpectedly, when he turned over and sat up, it was extremely smooth. There was not the slightest pain in his body. He sat up smoothly. Instead, it surprised him. In the darkness, that constantly changing color light gently shone on his body. Ghostly looked at his body. The injuries from the black water mystical viper's heavy collision, for some reason, suddenly unbelievably recovered. He frowned slightly. In his heart was really surprised, but for the moment he could not think of any reason. He wanted to stand up and take a good look at the surroundings first. Thinking of this, his body had just moved. Suddenly, he stopped. His body seemed to suddenly stiffen. He didn't know when it started, but there was another hand in his hand, a fair, slender, and gentle hand. Their grip was so tight, so natural, that it made one forget that their hands were still holding together. Ghostly was stunned, and then slowly looked to the side. That faint light, gently floating in the darkness, reflected that cold, beautiful face. Ainan's eyes were still closed, her face still pale. At the corner of her mouth, there seemed to be a faint trace of blood, like a strange red flower petal, landed on that snow-like fair face. Her lips, slightly pursed, as if still carrying a faint smile. A stretch of silence, whose eyes, quietly staring in the darkness, time like water, 10 years of time, deeply engraved in life, but also like everything had never happened, like it was yesterday. Boom! Suddenly, a loud sound exploded in this dark space. Immediately, the earth shook and the mountains swayed. In the distance, there seemed to be a clear cry of a phoenix and a furious roar. The entire dark space shook violently. Xiao Hui gave a strange cry. Its body turned into a rolling gourd, stumbled to the side, and with a plop fell onto the ground. Ghostly was also unable to sit properly and leaned to the side. And this force shook Lu Sueki's body, as if she suddenly woke up. She let out a soft cry. As her body tilted, she opened her eyes. The first thing that entered his eyes was darkness. Then, he saw a familiar face sitting beside him. Just like 10 years ago at the bottom of the forsaken abyss at the Heartless Sea, the tremors slowly subsided, and the surroundings gradually returned to normal. Who knew what was going on with this violent tremor? Lu Sueki slowly sat up and looked at Ghostly. Ghostly did not avoid her gaze and looked back at her. A moment later, they lowered their gazes. Their hands were still tightly clasped together. Lu Sueki did not speak. His body did not move. Ghostly's lips moved a little, and then he slowly released his hand and retracted it. Lu Sueki indifferently looked at that hand which retracted back into the darkness. That hand which just a moment ago was still emitting a faint warmth. In her eyes, a faint sorrow suddenly appeared, and then it disappeared, and she resumed her calmness. She stood up and at the same time, her brows slightly frowned. It seemed like she was also surprised by the sudden recovery of her injuries. She looked around and quietly said, "What is this place?" Ghostly also slowly stood up and said, "I am also not sure, but I remember that we flew into the Celestial Emperor treasury." Lu Sueki was silent for a moment and said, "Was it you who saved me?" Ghostly glanced at her and then indifferently said, "No, it was your luck that you flew in before the stone door closed." Lu Sueki turned her head and expressionlessly looked at him. A pair of eyes which were still bright in the darkness seemed to be glowing. Ghostly did not look at her eyes, turned his head away and started to walk towards that faint light. At the same time he said, "You do not owe me anything. If you want to kill me, just do it." Lu Sweki quietly stood in the darkness behind him, stood there for a long time, and then gently patted the dust off her body and tidied up her appearance. Ji. Xiao Hui, who was dizzy from the fall just now recovered and leapt over. In a few leaps, it scurried up to Ghost Li's shoulder and crouched on his shoulder, looked towards that flickering mysterious light. As it got nearer, the things reflected in their eyes also became clearer. This was a wooden platform erected in the darkness, about half a person's height, a circular wooden pillar about the thickness of a baby's arm connected to the ground. At the top, there was a small platform about 1 chi in size. In the middle of the platform, there was an ancient cup that seemed to be made of wood. Upon closer inspection, one could see that the entire wooden platform and the cup were completely connected to each other, as if they were one with the underground trees. But the most attractive thing was the thing in this small wooden cup. The wooden cup was about 3 cun tall, 2 cun wide. In the middle was a transparent liquid, and floating above that liquid, there was a small transparent stone, with 5 flat sides, sparkling and translucent. And from this stone, a gentle light was emitted, forming a semicircular light screen on the small wooden platform, refracting various colors of light, spreading out in all directions. Right now, Lu Sweki had already walked over, stood beside Ghostly and looked at that wooden cup. In the air, a strange fragrance floated faintly, pervading everywhere, making one's spirit roused when one smelled it. Ghostly and Lu Sweki were not ordinary people, but right now they could not tell what exactly it was. Actually, on this wooden platform in the Celestial Emperor Treasury, what was contained in the cup was the legendary celestial medicine from the Celestial Emperor's secret treasure. This wooden platform and wooden cup were connected as one with this unique tree, using this unique tree's 10,000 years of spiritual energy to preserve the elixir. And outside the Celestial Emperor Treasury, to be able to make the black water mystical viper, this kind of ancient demonic beast, drool over it so much that it did not hesitate to confront its natural enemy, the yellow bird that guarded the elixirs. It was precisely this cup of elixir that looked unremarkable. And Ghostly and Lu Sweki's injuries, suddenly mysteriously recovered, was actually related to this elixir and this treasury. Just that this kind of legendary secret news, today most people did not know, Ghostly and Lu Sweki did not know. Facing this kind of treasure, they only frowned in puzzlement. While pondering, suddenly, another loud sound was heard. The entire Celestial Emperor Treasury shook violently. At the same time, the black water mystical viper's terrifying roars were heard again. It seemed like this ancient demonic beast was extremely enraged and still refused to abandon the elixir. Although the Celestial Emperor Treasury was an ancient wondrous place, but right now, firstly it had been a long time, secondly it was unknown how many times the black water mystical viper had rammed into it. This level of ancient demonic beast's power, how could it be ordinary? If it was not the Celestial Emperor Treasury, if it was an ordinary small hill, most likely it would have been razed to the ground by the black water mystical viper. Right now cracking sounds were heard all around, everywhere reverberated with the sounds of hard trees groaning in pain, the twisting sounds that made one's heart jump. At the same time the treasury shook violently. Xiao Hui screamed and almost fell down from Ghostly's shoulder again, while Ghostly and Anan felt the earth shaking around them, almost losing their footing. Logically speaking, under this kind of violent impact, even if it was the entire wooden table and wooden cup, the elixir in the cup would also be spilled out. But just as the wooden cup was shaking violently, the stone floating on the surface of the water suddenly emitted a thin golden light. It shot straight up and shone on the light screen. Immediately, the entire light screen was dyed gold. Then, the light suddenly grew brighter. Under the illumination of this light screen, the wooden table, which seemed ready to move in the violent shaking, suddenly quietened down. until the surrounding shaking gradually calmed down. That golden light then slowly weakened and returned to its original state. Ghostly and Lou Sweki looked at each other, their eyes filled with astonishment and admiration. This kind of uncanny workmanship was really unimaginable. Ghostly looked around again, borrowing the light from this strange stone. He saw that other than this wooden table, there seemed to be nothing else in this treasury. But looking at this stone, it was crystal clear, immortal energy lingering in it. It was definitely not an ordinary item. It seemed like the rare treasure that he had been searching for so many days was this item. Once he thought of this, his heart warmed. He stretched out his hand to touch that wooden table's light screen. "Don't you touch it!" Suddenly, Lou Sweki's voice, suddenly turned cold, rang out beside him. Ghost Lee's hand stopped in midair and then slowly retracted, turned around and faced Lou Sweki. Both of them stood face to face. The distance was less than 3 chi, but the indistinct warmth between them, right now suddenly turned cold, replaced by the coldness behind the silence. Ghostly looked at Lou Sweki, unhurriedly said, "I want this thing." Lou Sweki looked at that man's eyes, quietly said, "I will not let you get it, unless you kill me first." Ghostly did not speak. That faint light in the darkness gently swirled, changing into 7 colors, as if narrating something. Rumble! Another deafening sound. Similarly the earth quaked and the mountains swayed, but this time the scale was even greater than before, although that strange stone emitted golden light to protect the wooden platform, but the surrounding walls of the Celestial Emperor Treasury seemed to be unable to hold on anymore. Following a hoarse snapping sound, above their heads, a huge piece of wood suddenly fell. Ghostly and Lou Sweki jumped away at the same time, following which the deafening sounds continued incessantly. The black water mystical viper outside seemed to have gone into a frenzy, unceasingly striking the Celestial Emperor Treasury. At the same time the clear cry of the phoenix in the roar also became more and more enraged and agitated. Outside, an earth-shattering battle seemed to be going on. The entire Celestial Emperor Treasury, under the immense external pressure, finally started to slowly deform. The walls on all sides started to slowly cave in. The broken pieces of wood started to fall like rain. Under such circumstances, Ghostly and Lou Sweki temporarily only cared about avoiding the falling huge pieces of wood, and for the moment could not be bothered with the wooden table. It looked like this Celestial Emperor Treasury was about to collapse, but at this moment, as if it was the power of the ancient deities, that strange stone suddenly emitted a much thicker and more dazzling golden light, abruptly turned into a pillar and shot up to the sky. And this time, it broke through that light screen that enveloped the wooden table, and shone directly on the Celestial Emperor Treasury's dome. In the treasury, a mysterious and distant voice suddenly sounded, like the mysterious Sanskrit chanting in Mount Lingshan, and also like the soft murmurs of the 9 netherworld's lonely souls. Following that golden light pillar pressing against the dome, the entire Celestial Emperor Treasury seemed to receive some kind of strong support and stopped caving in. The falling pieces of wood also gradually stopped. Then, in Lou Sweki and Ghost Lee's line of sight, on the entire Celestial Emperor Treasury dome, in that dazzling golden light, suddenly, that mysterious voice sounded, as if it was chanting something. Golden characters the size of a doe, under the illumination of the golden light, one after another appeared in the air. Heaven and earth heartless, treating all living things as straw dogs. Ghost Lee's body shook greatly. After a moment, those 9 words slowly disappeared, but that mysterious chanting voice instead became louder and louder, more and more vigorous. In an instant, that dazzling golden light pillar suddenly, like an explosion, blazing hot, shot towards the entire Celestial Emperor Treasury. On the surrounding walls, under the illumination of the golden light, one after another golden characters appeared in the air. The strokes were bold and vigorous, as if they were flying. Circling around Ghostly and Lou Sweki in the rumbling, flying in circles. Ghostly and Lou Sweki were awed by this breathtaking strange scene, but following that they were attracted by the surrounding mysterious characters, they looked on hungrily, forgetting everything around them. and Ghost Lee's heart was beating faster and faster. At this moment, there seemed to be a voice shouting loudly in his heart, "Tian Shu! Tian Shu! This is the third volume of Tian Shu." Outside the Celestial Emperor Treasury, Fa Xiang and the rest hid far away in the sky, watching the battle between the two ancient beasts on that strange tree. Their faces involuntarily turned pale. The huge tree trunk, which was originally exuberant with vitality, lush foliage and surrounded by innumerable vines and flowers, right now it seemed to have suffered a once-in-a-million-years calamity. Everywhere were broken branches and withered flowers, a tragic state. And in front of the tree trunk, outside the Celestial Emperor Treasury, the black water mystical viper coiled tightly around the Celestial Emperor Treasury's stone door. Its enormous snake head roared towards the sky. The divine beast Yellow Bird flapped its wings and flew. Every time it flapped its wings, a gust of gale would blow up. Even Fa Xiang and the rest who were watching from afar could feel the strong wind. The yellow bird was covered in orange-yellow feathers, both of its wings spread out to almost 100 zhang, sharp beak and eyes. Its claws were also huge and sharp. Right now it kept on swooping down, using its sharp beak and huge claws to attack the black water mystical viper. And the black water mystical viper's mouth kept on spitting out poisonous gas. Its snake head swayed, its fangs sharp, counterattacking with all its might, and occasionally struck the Celestial Emperor Treasury below it. Chapter 199. This divine bird and enormous serpent fought each other until the sky turned dark, the wind and clouds changed color. Luckily it was in this desolate and uninhabited place. If not with these two ancient beasts' powers, no matter how prosperous the place was, it would also be destroyed by them. Fighting till now, the tyrannical black water mystical viper was already riddled with wounds. On its gigantic body, which was originally like a demon god, lines after lines of huge wounds were vividly visible. Dark red blood kept flowing out, staining the tree trunk below it dark red. An ancient demonic beast like it, its body was originally as hard as stone. Only the yellow bird's sharp claws and sharp beak could hurt it. But although the black water mystical viper was severely injured, but the yellow bird itself was not doing well. Its originally bright and beautiful phoenix-like feathers, right now in the battle with the black water mystical viper, was bitten several times by the black water mystical viper. Countless fell off. Its body also had several wounds, deep to the bones. Blood gushed out, staining the area around its chest red. Right now, the two enormous beasts temporarily stopped their attacks. The black water mystical viper entrenched above the Celestial Emperor Treasury. The yellow bird landed on the nearby tree trunk, both sides facing each other. The black snake roared. The yellow bird cried out, as if demonstrating their might. Neither seemed to have any intention of retreating. But from the outside, the black water mystical viper seemed to be in a disadvantageous situation. After all, the terrain was not good. Hanging alone high up in the sky, it could only entangle tightly on the tree trunk, and the yellow bird could flap its wings and fly, continuously attacking from all directions, gaining the upper hand. In addition, the yellow bird was the black water mystical viper, this kind of demonic beast's natural nemesis. Towards the black water mystical viper's venom, it naturally had the ability to resist. Although it was still wary, but after being bitten, it was unable to injure its core and was not fatal. One of the black water mystical viper's most powerful abilities basically lost its effect in front of this yellow bird. In addition to the disadvantageous terrain, it seemed to be aware of this point and became even more enraged. The huge eyes stared wide. Suddenly the snake head turned around. While the yellow bird was still at a distance away, it ferociously charged towards the Celestial Emperor Treasury. The yellow bird was enraged. With a clear phoenix cry, once again flapped its wings and rose up. But this strike was the accumulation of the black water mystical viper's entire strength, crashing down with a loud bang, not to mention other things. Just the huge tree trunk below it was already shaking violently. On the Celestial Emperor Treasury, cracks were instantly all over. Even that huge stone door had a few cracks from this strike. It was as if, after persistently resisting the black water mystical viper's terrible power for countless times, right now, the mysterious power in the celestial emperor treasury finally started to crumble. In the distance, Fa Xiang and the rest looked at each other and gasped. The yellow bird let out a shrill cry, flew to the air, suddenly swooped down. Its sharp beak was like a huge arrow leaving the bow, shooting towards the black water mystical viper. In an instant, the sky changed color and the wind and clouds changed color. There seemed to be an intense gale forming a huge vortex that looked like a tornado. The yellow bird was in the violent whirlwind as it charged down. The black water mystical viper roared loudly. Its huge snake eyes suddenly shot out endless ferocious glint and ferocious expression. It actually disregarded the yellow bird's attack in the sky and once again used its huge snake head to smash into the celestial emperor treasury. Boom! In that instant, sand and stones flew, dust swirled up, a tearing sound reverberated through heaven and earth. Finally, after a loud sound, the celestial emperor treasury's dome wall collapsed with a loud crash, forcefully smashed open by the black water mystical viper's unparalleled power. Almost at the same time, the yellow bird swooped down furiously. The tornado instantly enveloped the black water mystical viper. The crowd only heard the black water mystical viper making a deafening roar. The sound was extremely mournful and shrill, as if it had suffered some great damage. The gale was extremely violent. Fa Xiang and the rest were like ants drifting with the wind, and had no choice but to retreat further. After the dust settled, the roar did not lessen at all. The crowd looked over and saw on the black water mystical viper's head, blood flowed profusely, the right snake eye spurted out like a fountain, one of its eyes was actually pecked blind by the yellow bird. And at this moment, in the celestial emperor treasury which was struck open, the golden light slowly flickered and then gradually dimmed. The black water mystical viper and the yellow bird could not be bothered with the battle and looked down at the same time. In front of these two enormous beasts, even the enormous celestial emperor treasury seemed like a child's toy. In the flying dust, in the celestial emperor treasury, two figures staggered up. It was Ghost Li and Lu Sueki. And Xiao Hui, who had been crouching on Ghost Li's shoulder, right now fell down from his shoulder and hid under that wooden platform, using its hands to grab tightly onto the wooden pillar, stabilized its body. Presumably with the black water mystical viper's reckless attack, the situation in the celestial emperor treasury must not have been very good. Looking at Ghost Li and Lu Sueki, although their faces were slightly pale but they were still considered calm, Xiao Hui on the other hand was so frightened that it turned ghastly pale, its mouth calling out non-stop. Ghost Li calmed down and then his body shook. On both sides there was an unimaginably huge beast, glaring like a tiger at its prey and looking at them. They were all seething with murderous intent. Without thinking he knew, this place was not a good place to be. But without waiting for him to react, the black water mystical viper's remaining snake eye had already seen that wooden platform in the celestial emperor treasury and that transparent liquid in the wooden cup on the wooden platform. Immediately, the black water mystical viper's eyes shot out an uncontrollable greed. Its huge snake head suddenly charged down, and the yellow bird would not just stand by and watch. With a clear cry, its sharp beak also pecked down. These two enormous beasts, at the same time, unleashed their might. No matter how high Ghost Li and Lu Sueki's skills were, they could only instinctively control their magical weapons and swiftly fly away. But Ghost Li had just flown up. Suddenly his body shook, and at the same time a zzz sound was heard from behind. Xiao Hui, who had been crouching on his shoulder, was now hiding under the wooden platform and did not follow up. Although his character had changed greatly from the past, but he still had deep feelings for Xiao Hui. Without even thinking, he wanted to turn back to fetch Xiao Hui again. Unexpectedly he had just paused. The yellow bird's sharp cry, together with the black water mystical viper, both of its wings flapped. A gust of violent wind surged over and actually pushed Ghost Li and Lu Sueki far away. Ghostly was greatly anxious, but the force of the yellow bird's flap was extremely strong. His body involuntarily flew far away. With great difficulty he managed to control his body. He was already more than several zhangs away from the tree trunk. Both of his brows tightly frowned. The clear light below him flourished and immediately flew back. Right now the battle between the yellow bird and the black water mystical viper was nearing its climax. The black water mystical viper's target was clear. It wanted to snatch that small cup of elixir, but the yellow bird naturally would not allow it to touch it, therefore it did not fly up any more and stayed on the tree trunk. The two enormous beasts surrounded the small wooden cup, biting and pecking here and there, roaring repeatedly, but for the moment under the other party's power enveloping them, they were unable to lower their heads to reach the elixir. Xiao Hui hid under the wooden platform. Initially it was still a little afraid, but gradually it realized those two huge fellows were only fighting with all their might above it and did not come down, so it quietly peeked its head out to watch. Just that with this look, it saw that the light screen that enveloped the wooden cup, along with the collapse of the Celestial Emperor treasury, also disappeared. Xiao Hui slowly climbed up to the wooden platform, raised its head and looked up. In the air, the snake head and the bird head were pecking here and there, fighting intensely. Occasionally huge scales and feathers fell down like rain. The monkey scratched its head and blinked its eyes. It lowered its head and saw that in the wooden cup beside it, the liquid was like water, reflecting its image. There was a stone floating on the surface of the water, but it didn't sink. It was sparkling and translucent, and no one knew what it was. It glanced at that wooden cup a few times, suddenly crouched on top, stretched its head into the cup and started to gulp. Gulu, 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 gulu. The black water mystical viper and the yellow bird, who were fighting to the death just now, the two enormous beasts, who were still fighting with earth-shattering intensity, suddenly both of their bodies seemed to have frozen. Gulu, 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 gulu. This tiny little sound, in the innumerable terrifying deafening noises, was not even worth mentioning, but for some reason, suddenly, the entire heaven and earth stopped, leaving only this comical monkey drinking sound. That cup was very small. The liquid it contained was only about half a cup. The monkey Xiao Hui very quickly finished it, and then raised its head and looked around. In the air, the black water mystical viper looked down and seemed to have not reacted, and then raised its head and looked at its nemesis, the yellow bird. And the yellow bird also looked at Xiao Hui almost exactly the same, and then looked at the black water mystical viper. Tsk, tsk. Suddenly, another strange sound was heard. The black water mystical viper and yellow bird looked down at the same time. Xiao Hui stuck out its tongue and licked twice, following which the monkey head shook. Obviously the taste of the water in the cup was not very good, far from the delicacies that his master cooked in the kitchen at Qin Yun Hill Big Bamboo Valley. Xiao Hui was very dissatisfied. At this moment its monkey eyes turned. Although the water in the cup was finished, there was still a small bright stone, quietly lying in the wooden cup. It simply picked it up and then lightly threw it into the air, opened its mouth, like a human eating a peanut, with a gulp, swallowed it. Far away, Fa Xiang and the rest were sweating profusely. Suddenly, a roar was heard, a sharp whistle. The black water mystical viper and yellow bird charged down at the same time. The snake head and bird beak, together smashed towards this pitiful little monkey. Xiao Hui turned pale with fright. Even the monkey hair on its head stood up in fright, but right now there was nowhere to escape. It could only instinctively lay down on the wooden platform, using both its hands to hug its head. Seeing that Xiao Hui was about to die under the combined attack of the two enormous beasts, at this critical moment, a clear light flashed past. It was Ghostly, who had rushed over with all his might, stretched out his hand to pick up Xiao Hui and flew away with all his might. They had just left the wooden platform when they heard a deafening sound behind them. The entire Celestial Emperor Treasury building turned into ashes. The black water mystical viper howled loudly on the tree trunk, but although it was invincible on land, it was helpless against an enemy that could fly. After howling for half a day, in addition the elixir was already lost, and with its natural enemy here, It finally turned around angrily and slowly climbed down the huge tree, very quickly, disappearing into the mist. But Ghostly and Xiao Hui's danger had not disappeared. The black water mystical viper could not do anything, but there was still the mythical yellow bird that had been unhindered for 80,000 miles in the 9 heavens, right now flapping its wings, refused to give up and pursued closely. Ghostly's forehead was covered in sweat. This yellow bird's flying speed was extremely fast, but firstly because of the intense battle with the black water mystical viper, it was riddled with injuries and its physical strength was greatly depleted. Secondly, Ghostly was small and agile. He kept making sharp turns in the air, and so the yellow bird did not catch up. But even so, the yellow bird's exhausted body gradually caught up. It looked like it was not far away and was about to be caught up by the yellow bird. Xiao Hui, who was in Ghostly's embrace, screamed loudly, looked very anxious and only called out twice and suddenly made a sound, not knowing if it was full from drinking or something. At this moment, it burped. Ghostly felt angry and funny at the same time. He did not know whether to laugh or cry, but right now he could not care so much and could only try his best to avoid that swift and fierce sound of the wind behind him. While flying from the corner of his eyes, he suddenly saw a flower bed ahead. It was different from the surrounding mess. The flowers were still luxuriant, and among them, there was a faint red light. His body shook. In that instant he could already tell what exactly was hidden there. He did not expect them to also come here, but why did they not tell him? He was puzzled, but right now it was after all a matter of life and death. He did not have time to think too much and immediately flew over there. The yellow bird followed closely. Far away, Lu Sweki and the rest exclaimed. The yellow bird's sharp claws were about to reach Ghostly's back. Looking at the yellow bird's furious expression, it would not rest until it tore these people who stole the Celestial Emperor elixirs into pieces. In the blink of an eye, Ghostly used all his strength, turned into a dark green light like lightning, flew past that patch of flower beds, and the yellow bird did not notice anything else, followed closely and flew above the flower beds. A strange change occurred. Under the flowers, suddenly the red light exploded. Connected as one, above the sky, a red ancient cauldron appeared. It was Ghost King Sek's treasure, hidden dragon cauldron. And the person standing on top of the cauldron, his face calm, his mouth chanting, it was Ghost King. The mysterious incantation once again reverberated. At the same time Qing Long Yuji also appeared beside the flower bed, both hands waving continuously. Instantly, under the hidden dragon cauldron's mysterious and unfathomable spiritual power, the entrapped dragon watchtower formation was activated again. The red light swept up, connected as one, forming a dark red light screen, converging on the hidden dragon cauldron in the sky, trapping the yellow bird within. How could the yellow bird wait to be captured? Immediately dashed left and right, but not knowing if it was because it had used up too much of its strength in the battle with the black water mystical viper, or this entrapped dragon watchtower's power was too strong. It actually hit a wall a few times, and no matter what it tried, it could not charge out. Instead it was repelled by the mysterious force. Its injuries looked even more serious. In the end, as if it knew it was helpless, the yellow bird wailed, stopped in the red light screen, and did not move anymore. Ghost King gave a long laugh and landed. Ghostly also unhurriedly carried Xiao Hui and landed beside him. Right now Qing Long Yuji also stood over. Ghostly frowned, looked at Ghost King. Ghost King instead smiled, waved his hand and said, "The matter's here, we will talk about it later." Speaking, his eyes gazed afar, looked at Fa Xiang, Lu Sweki and the rest, suddenly smiled and said to Ghostly, "You tell us, how are we going to deal with these few people?" Ghostly's body shook, although Ghost King's smile was amiable, but in his eyes, a glint flashed. Indistinctly there was a trace of coldness within. The surroundings suddenly quietened down again. Chapter 200. Death Marsh. At the top of the giant tree, Anan, Fa Xiang, Lin Jingyu and Xing Shushu, the four of them, unhurriedly landed on the messy giant tree trunk. The surroundings were filled with cracks, countless broken branches. Even after a long time, it still made one aghast at the battle between the two ancient giant beasts. But right now their attention was clearly more concentrated on the few people in front of them. Fa Xiang frowned slightly, pondered and did not speak. These few people in front of them, during the battle between Qingyun Hill and East Si Lubo Hill, he had seen them before. Obviously they were Ghost King Sect's sect head Ghost King and his two capable subordinates Qinglong, Yuji. In addition to Ghostly, who was no longer who he was in the past, it could be said that their strength far surpassed their side. Unfortunately, after climbing up the tree, at that fork, they split up with Qin Yun sect Shao Yikai, Funxiang Valley Li Sun, Yan Hong and the rest. If not, although they might not be able to defeat these four people, but they would still have the strength to fight. But thinking like that, Ghost King sect's side did not seem to have the intention to make a move immediately. Ghost King glanced over and indifferently asked Ghostly, "You tell us, how are we going to deal with these few people?" Ghostly did not answer immediately, instead looked at Ghost King. Ghost King looked amiable, seemingly peaceful, but his eyes indistinctly flashed with a sharp glint. After a moment, he indifferently said, "Since sect head you are here, naturally all matters will be decided by sect head." Qinglong, who was standing beside, frowned slightly. The black veil on Yuji's face also seemed to gently sway, looked at Ghostly. Ghost King's expression did not change, a trace of smile still hung on his lips. He unhurriedly said, "That day when you came to this death marsh, I have already said that everything here will be decided by you. Me, Qinglong and Yuji came here, is only to capture this yellow bird. These four good faction people, it is still your call, whatever you want, it will be done. Pay." Suddenly, an extremely disdainful snort was heard from ahead. Everyone looked forward and saw that it was Bei Bei with a frosty expression. He said coldly, "Demons of the evil path, if you have the guts, come up and fight to the death. Why are you standing there like a woman gossiping? Ridiculous." Once he said it, Qinglong's expression darkened first. Instead, Ghost King looked at Lin Jingyu from afar, did not get angry, instead smiled, turned to Ghostly and said, "This person is Lin Jingyu, right, that childhood friend of yours?" Ghostly was shocked. Until now, Lin Jingyu's reputation was not that great, but for some reason, Ghost King could recognize him at one glance. He looked at Ghost King's slight smile. His heart suddenly turned cold. Ghost King looked at him, indifferently said, "Tell me, what should I do?" Ghostly met his gaze, looked back calmly, said, "Most of the matters here have been completed. These people are not important characters, don't bother about them. Sect Master, you should first take care of the yellow bird, that is the top priority." The Ghost King looked at him and did not speak. For a moment there was silence. A trace of worry flashed past Qinglong's eyes. Yuji, who was beside him because of her black veil, her expression could not be seen, but it seemed that she was not at ease. Yuji's eyes passed through the veil, glanced at Ghostly and Ghost King, and then glanced afar, suddenly was stunned. Among the four good faction people, Anan stood quietly at the back, her face cold, but her eyes were looking at Ghostly from afar. Under that frosty face, there seemed to be an unknown faint concern. Yuji suddenly stretched out her hand and quietly pushed Qinglong. Qinglong was feeling worried, suddenly felt something and turned to look at Yuji. Yuji's black veil swayed slightly, moved towards Ghost King's direction. He and Yuji were part of the four holy envoys of Ghost King sect. How would he not know what she was thinking? Just that right now his heart was filled with misgivings. After pondering for a while, Qinglong eventually still quietly walked behind Ghost King, quietly said, "Sect Master, what Ghostly said is not without reason. Now that the yellow bird has been subdued, we better settle it down first before talking. If not inside the death marsh, Wandu, Huan two sects people will be there. Any delay would cause unforeseen events." Ghost King turned and looked at Qinglong, slowly nodded and said, "What you said is right." Then his eyes glimmered indistinctly, said to Ghostly, "Since it is so, I will leave this place to you." Ghostly quietly nodded and said, "Don't worry." Ghost King looked at him again, suddenly smiled and turned to leave. Azure Dragon, who was behind him, smiled at Ghostly and followed. Yuji unhurriedly walked up. When she passed by Ghostly, Ghostly looked at her and nodded slightly. Yuji's black veil swayed slightly, but she did not say anything and just walked past. After Ghost King and the rest disappeared, Ghostly slowly turned and looked at Effaceong and the rest. Effaceong coughed once, stepped forward and said, "Zhang Junior brother." Ghostly coldly said, "I am called Ghostly." Effaceong paused. Lin Jingyu, who was behind him, frowned and said in a deep voice, "Xiao Fan, why must you be like this? I know you are kind-hearted, just that you were harmed by a scoundrel, that's why you strayed into the evil way." Effaceong heard till here, felt it was harsh, but he only smiled bitterly and did not make a sound. Lin Jingyu was heard saying, "As long as you are willing to turn back, I believe with Daoxian sect head's magnanimity, he will definitely allow you to return to Qingyun again." Ghostly indifferently said, "Why should I turn back?" Lin Jingyu's body shook. His eyes stared intently at this childhood friend in front of him. He was heard standing there, using an indescribable coldness, said, "Heaven and earth are heartless, treating all living things as straw dogs. I am well on this path, I don't need you all to come and save me." Lu Sueki, who was standing at the back, her body also seemed to tremble slightly. Xing Shushu stood beside her, saw her expression, frowned slightly but did not speak. Lin Jingyu's face was filled with anger, stepped forward and was about to say something but was stopped by Effaceong. Effaceong looked at Lin Jingyu, gently shook his head at him, quietly said, "He has gone deep into the evil way, you must not be too hasty or else it will have the opposite effect." Lin Jingyu had initially stopped Effaceong, his face full of anger, but after hearing his soft words, he finally knew that it was as he said. He turned and looked at Ghostly. His heart softened, thinking of the times when the two of them played together. Eventually he still clenched his teeth and retreated. Effaceong pondered for a moment, spoke to Ghostly. "Ghostly patron, no matter if you admit it or not, we still have a history. Now that the Celestial Emperor treasury has been destroyed, it seems that there are no more exceptional treasures, but let's part ways here." Ghostly snorted, glanced at him and then looked at the others, looked at Lin Jingyu, looked at Xing Shushu, and finally his eyes landed on Lu Sueki's face. That cold lady stood at the back, her face like frost, her eyes like water, so deep that one could not see the bottom, not knowing what exactly was she thinking in the depths of her heart. Ghostly looked away, without a word, turned and walked away. Not long after, he faintly heard someone chasing up from behind. Ghostly frowned, turned around and was surprised. It was indeed Xing Shushu who had caught up. Looking at Effaceong and the rest's expressions, they seemed to be stunned too. Xing Shushu ran to him, his back facing Effaceong and the rest, stared at Ghostly for a moment, suddenly laughed out, said, "You won't kill me, right?" Ghostly looked at him, looked at his smile. It seemed like there was no change from when they met at Qingyun Hill Tongtian Peak, still that cheerful. After a moment, his gaze finally eased up, but his voice was still as calm as still water, said, "What is it?" Xing Shushu made two sounds, shrugged his shoulders and said, "Anyway, I still treat you as a friend. As for what you think, I can't do anything about it." At this point, he paused for a moment. Suddenly, he blinked a few times and said in a low voice, "Big brother, can you let me hug this three-eyed monkey?" Ghostly was startled. The scene of Xing Shushu pestering him for Xiao Hui suddenly appeared in his heart. An inexplicable warmth rose in his heart. Actually, he grew up at Qingyun Hill, every grass and every tree in Qingyun Hill Big Bamboo Peak. He had deep feelings, not to mention Xing Shushu, who was one of his few friends. Xing Shushu saw Ghostly did not speak, but did not seem to have any disdain to object. He felt happy. His mind had always been extremely intelligent, regarding Ghostly, this friend who had entered the evil way. His heart also placed great importance on him, just that he knew Zhang Xiaofan's character, persevering and stubborn, for a promise made in the past, he would rather die to protect it, One could imagine how serious the injury he suffered that year was. Therefore these years, in order to pull this good friend away from the evil way, Zing did not know how many ways he had secretly thought of. In the end he could only come up with one conclusion: it was better not to rush. Right now his eyes landed on Xiao Hui, who was lying on Ghost Li's shoulder. Immediately his eyes brightened. He smiled and said, "Xiao Hui, it is me. Do you still recognize me?" Xiao Hui lay lazily on his shoulder. For some reason, its monkey face was flushed red, looked like a drunk person. After Zing Shu Shu called out a few times, it then weakly opened its eyes, glanced at Zing Shu Shu, impatiently called out twice and closed its eyes again. Zing Shu Shu was not angry at all, looking at him. He seemed to like it very much. The words drooling were clearly written on his forehead. Ghost Li looked at him. Zing Shu Shu's expression did not seem to have any change for the past 10 years, suddenly sighed, said, "Forget it, it is also tired today. If we are fated to meet again in the future, we will talk about it then." Zing Shu Shu reluctantly looked at Xiao Hui, nodded his head, then his eyes moved to Ghost Li's face. Ghost Li indifferently said, "In the future, if the good and evil stand against each other, you and I will face each other. Feel free to strike. As for—" He looked up at Zing Shu Shu, after a long while, slowly said, "You and I are on different paths, we will definitely be enemies, but in my heart, I still see you as a friend." Zing Shu Shu was overjoyed, smiled widely, nodded his head vigorously, stretched out his hand and was about to pat Ghost Li's shoulder, but suddenly felt it was inappropriate and retracted it. Then his eyes rolled, as if he suddenly thought of something. A snicker appeared on his lips. He took out something from his bosom. It was a rather old book with a blue cover. There were no words on the cover. Not knowing what kind of book it was, Ghost Li frowned. For some reason, this book seemed familiar, but for the moment he could not recall where he had seen it before. Zing Shu Shu quietly stuffed the book into Ghost Li's hands, softly laughed and said, "We are all brothers, meeting for the first time in 10 years. This is a small gift for you." Ghost Li looked at Zing Shu Shu's expression. His smile was 70% happy, but also 30% inexplicably wretched, frowned and looked at the book in his hands, casually flipped it open. Even with Ghost Li's composure, his body still trembled and quickly closed the book. The things in the book were many words and pictures. In the pictures were all naked men and women. 10 years ago, when they were still young, on Tong Tian Peak, Zing Shu Shu wanted to use it to exchange for Xiao Hui's erotic book. Chapter 201. You. Ghost Li was speechless, unable to speak. Zing Shu Shu glared at him, said, "If you do not wish for both of our reputations to be ruined, then don't speak so loudly." Ghost Li stared at him, an inexplicable confusion in his heart. He should have felt that this person was really mischievous, but for some reason, this seemingly senseless and uninteresting action suddenly made him feel much closer to Zing Shu Shu. The times of the past seemed to have returned again. Zing Shu Shu smiled at him, turned and walked back. His quick-wittedness in a moment of desperation actually had a deep meaning. To pull this friend back from the evil way, he must first let him acknowledge him as a friend. Now that he had risked being ridiculed by everyone to do this senseless thing, Ghost Li was indeed speechless. Most likely in the future, when they meet again, their relationship would definitely be much better than now. Thinking of this, a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. Fa Xiang waited for him to walk back, smiled at him and said, "Zing senior brother, what made you so happy?" Zing Shu Shu was in a good mood, made a face at Fa Xiang and said, "Buddha said, cannot say, cannot say." Fa Xiang smiled and glanced at Ghost Li. That person was standing there, holding a thick blue book in his hand. His expression seemed complicated, not knowing what he was thinking. He shook his head and spoke to the others. "The matter here is settled, let's go too. If there is anything, we will talk about it later." Zing Shu Shu was the first to nod, then Lin Jingyu and Lu Sueki also silently nodded in agreement. The four of them turned into 4 brilliant lights, rose to the sky, circled once in the air and then left. Ghostly stood on the huge tree trunk, suddenly felt an emptiness in his heart, as if he had lost something. His gaze then landed on the book in his hand, and then he raised his hand, looked like he was about to throw the book out, but suddenly he gave a bitter laugh, and finally kept the book back into his bosom. Then, he breathed deeply and then let out a long breath, pulled himself together and said, "Shall we, let's go out." Shall we this time did not even open its eyes, indistinctly called out twice, "Zz, zz." Not sure if it was considered a reply. Ghostly smiled, waved his right hand, controlled the soul-devourer magical treasure, turned into a green light, flew away like lightning, and left the giant tree. Like riding on the clouds, passing through the miasma, Ghostly flew in the air above the death marsh, coming out from the inner marsh, slightly identified the direction in the air, and then flew towards where the Ghost King sect men were stationed in the outer marsh. His flying speed was naturally extremely fast, but the death marsh was really huge. After flying for less than an hour, all he could see was a vast sea of grass, a stretch of emerald green. Although he did not know how many death traps there were below, but looking at it from the air, it was a picturesque scene, making one feel refreshed. Just that when they were about to reach where the Ghost King sect people were, Ghostly suddenly frowned. In the air, a familiar smell of blood drifted faintly, dispersed with the wind. Ghostly's expression changed. With a light whistle, the green light under his feet grew brighter, and he rushed down from the sky. The sharp green light descended from the sky, bringing with it an intense gust of wind, flew past the green grass and pond. The invisible wind blew the sea of grass to the sides. On the water's surface, waves of ripples were formed. Very soon, Ghostly saw where the Ghost King sect people were gathered, saw that many people were still gathered there. It seemed that at least most of them were still safe and sound. Then he was half relieved. At this moment, the Ghost King sect disciples also noticed Ghostly descending from the sky, and one by one stood up. Ghostly landed and stood on the ground, but his first reaction was to frown even tighter. The smell of blood here was actually extremely strong, seemed like the smell of blood that he had smelled earlier was emitted from here. The group of Ghost King sect disciples beside all lowered their heads and stood solemnly. Although Ghostly did not kill indiscriminately these few years, but he cultivated an evil way. His temperament changed greatly. His body would uncontrollably emit a cold and callous aura. In Ghost King sect, other than the sect head Ghost King, the other person whom the ordinary disciples respected the most, was instead him, this rising star. At this moment, a person walked out from the crowd. It was a young man, sharp eyes and sword-like brows, rather handsome. It was Yenhui. He walked up and bowed to Ghostly, said, "Deputy sect head, you are back." Ghostly nodded and said, "What happened here?" Yenhui wanted to speak but stopped, looked at Ghostly. Ghostly understood and walked forward. Yenhui looked around, loudly said, "Deputy sect head is back. Everyone stay at your posts, don't panic." The crowd responded in unison and dispersed. Yenhui quickly caught up with Ghostly, quietly said, "Follow me." After speaking, he strode to the right side of the secluded area. After walking for a while, they came to a place where the grass was lush. The wild grass was almost half a person's height. There was no one around, but the smell of blood in the air was getting heavier. Ghostly looked at Yenhui. Yenhui's face was also slightly pale, quietly said, "Look for yourself." Speaking, he walked to that patch of grass, stretched out his hand and pushed the wild grass aside. Ghostly slowly walked forward, looked into that patch of grass. Instantly his countenance changed greatly. This patch of grass looked no different from the surroundings, but in the middle, it was all dyed bright red with human blood. The smell of blood assaulted his nostrils, making him want to vomit. And under the thick grass, there were 13 human corpses piled up, the state of their deaths unbearable to look at. Almost every one of their bodies were broken into pieces. Even though Ghostly had been in the evil sect for these few years, and was used to seeing bloodshed, but this kind of cruel methods, it was the first time he saw it. He closed his eyes, composed himself, and then his face regained its calmness, slowly walked forward and carefully examined the corpses. Yen Hui followed behind him, quietly said, "These disciples were arranged to guard here last night. This place is the furthest from where our main troops are. They are the furthest informants we have set up. These people are also quite capable." Unexpectedly, in one night last night, without a sound, they were all slaughtered. Ghost Li's face darkened. His eyes gradually turned cold, slowly said, "Who is the murderer? Do you have any clue?" Yen Hui did not answer immediately, instead said, "Deputy Head, come here and take a look." Ghost Li glanced at him, saw Yen Hui walking deeper into the grass, stepping over these unbearable corpses. In a deeper part of the grass, there was another corpse, but this person's corpse was relatively intact. Only his left hand was missing. Ghost Li's eyes twitched. He knew this person. His name was Su Chonghai, one of his highly skilled subordinates. Unexpectedly, he also died here. Yen Hui walked to Su Chonghai, said, "You look." Ghost Li walked nearer, looked down, saw beside Su Chonghai's head, his remaining right hand scribbled 2 words on the ground. "Fish monster." That fish word was still clear, but the second monster word was already blurred. Seemed like Su Chonghai was already exhausted. "Fish monster." Ghost Li frowned. Yen Hui nodded, said, "I also don't know what this means. Don't tell me there are actually fish monsters nearby, but after discovering them today, I immediately searched the surroundings but didn't find any trace of fish monsters." Ghost Li slowly turned and walked out of the grass. Yen Hui followed. The unpleasant smell in the air was still very strong, but compared to the grass, it seemed much fresher. Ghost Li took a deep breath, suddenly said, "Where is Kill for Life Monk? Why isn't he here?" Yen Hui was silent for a while, said, "After he saw this scene in the morning, he flew into a rage. Later on, from Su Chonghai's hand gestures, he somehow guessed that those mysterious fish monsters were heading south, so he chased after them alone. I tried to persuade him, but he didn't listen." And halfway through his sentence, he suddenly stopped. Ghost Li glanced at him, said, "What is it?" A trace of hatred flashed across Yen Hui's face, said, "Originally, Deputy Head, you had given strict orders that before you return, we cannot have any conflict with He Huan sect and Wan Du clan, but this morning's murder, I felt most likely it was done by either Wan Du clan or He Huan sect, so I secretly brought some people to their location, wanted to investigate, if it was really done by them. Naturally, we will take revenge." Ghost Li indifferently said, "It happened suddenly, you are not wrong. Then after you went, what was the result?" Yen Hui hesitated for a while, said, "This was greatly out of my expectation. Wan Du clan's men, for some unknown reason, had all retreated out of the Death Marsh the day before, and He Huan sect." He looked at Ghost Li, quietly said, "It seemed like the same thing happened to us. More than 20 people died." Ghost Li's countenance changed slightly, said, "There is such a thing?" Yen Hui said, "Yes, I personally investigated and then came back." Ghost Li did not speak, stood there, seemed to be deep in thought. Yen Hui did not dare to disturb, but after a long time, Ghost Li still did not speak, could not help but softly said, "Deputy Head, what should we do now?" Ghost Li did not directly answer him. Instead, as if he suddenly thought of something, turned and looked at him, said, "Before I returned, did Ghost King's sect head come here?" Yen Hui's countenance changed and then nodded, said, "Yes." A faint glint flashed across Ghost Li's eyes, said, "What did he say?" Yen Hui said, "Sect head came with Qing Long and Zhu Ke, the 2 holy envoys. He came to the vicinity to take a look at the situation. His expression was very ugly, but in the end he only said, 'All the matters here will be handled by Deputy Head,' and then left with the 2 holy envoys." Ghost Li was expressionless. Another period of silence. Yen Hui naturally still did not know about the subtle relationship between Ghost King and Ghost Li, and could only watch him from the side. After a while, Ghost Li nodded and said, "You have handled this matter very well. Now that the Death Marsh matter has come to an end, from now onwards, immediately bring your subordinates and leave this place. turn back to majestic Fox Mountain. Yen Hui nodded and said, Then Deputy Head, what about you? Ghostly turned his head, looked at the white clouds in the horizon. That place looked spotlessly white and flawless. Who would have thought that under it, there would be so many bloody things happening? He indifferently said, Kill the living monk, although a little rash, but his tracking skills are unique. These fish monsters are of unknown origin and also killed my subordinates. Naturally, I have to investigate further. Yen Hui lowered his head behind, said, Yes. Ghostly nodded and said, You go. After speaking, his eyes gradually looked towards the south. The sea of grass there was vast. The wind blew past the death marsh, not knowing what secrets were hidden there. Unexpectedly, in his mind, suddenly appeared a few days ago, when he, Jean Pinger and Qin Wuyen were secretly meeting, that mysterious fish-headed strange person who suddenly attacked Xiao Huan. Chapter 202. The wind rustled, the ancient path bleak, extended forward alone. Tanis Ka and his granddaughter Tani had already left the death marsh, traveled east for 3 days. Today the sun was right in the middle of the day. They were still walking on the ancient path, just that the flat wilderness on both sides of the ancient path had been gradually replaced by hills and jungles. Tanis Ka glanced ahead, saw a dilapidated stone pavilion not far ahead. He felt tired from walking, turned and said to Tani, Let's go take a rest. Xiao Huan nodded and looked back. Her eyes were full of smiles as she said, Elder Taoist, let's go sit together. Wild Dog Taoist, who had been following behind them, smiled and nodded. Originally, after Wild Dog Taoist left the death marsh, for some reason, he followed Tanis Ka and Tani from afar, made Tanis Ka feel uneasy. But a few days ago, after suddenly meeting that middle-aged man who called himself Wan Renwang, Xiao Huan exchanged a few words with him, and their relationship became a little closer. These few days, they got much closer and directly followed behind them. Tanis Ka walked to the pavilion, saw Wild Dog Taoist also followed Tani in. He was not as courteous to Wild Dog as Tani, rolled his eyes, suddenly said in a strange tone, I say Wild Dog Taoist, why are you always following the two of us? We are all poor wretches, there is nothing for you to rob. Wild Dog Taoist glared at Tanis Ka, retorted, Smelly old man, pretending to be poor again, don't think I don't know there is something strange in that bamboo pole of yours. Tanis Ka and Tani were stunned. Tanis Ka immediately jumped up as if his buttocks were on fire. His face flushed red, angrily said, Good fellow, I already knew you are not a good person, so you are really coveting my money. Wild Dog Taoist rolled his eyes at him. Before he spoke, Tani beside him also said with slight surprise, Priest, how did you know? Once Tani spoke, Wild Dog Taoist for some reason suddenly quieted down, hesitated for a moment, embarrassedly said to Tani, Every day the bamboo pole never leaves his hand, even when he sleeps he hugs it in his arms. That's not all, but every once in a while, he couldn't help but touch the bamboo pole. Looking at him like this, even an idiot would know that there's something wrong with that bamboo pole. Xiao Huan burst out laughing. Tanis Ka's old face turned red, snorted and turned his head away, suddenly felt that this was too embarrassing, turned back and angrily said to Wild Dog Taoist, Even if there is a problem with my bamboo pole, it is not up to you to care. Tell me, why are you following us? Wild Dog Taoist was stunned for a moment, speechless for a moment. Tanis Ka immediately became complacent, a smile appeared on his face. He pointed at Wild Dog and said, Ha, don't think I don't know, you little guy, you are drooling over my property and my Xiao Huan's beauty, you are always scheming. Grandfather! Xiao Huan's face was red, loudly called out to Zhou Yisian. Zhou Yisian then realized that his words were not right, but his old face could not be pulled down, stammered. Say, is it? Wild Dog Taoist secretly glanced at Xiao Huan, saw that the young lady's fair skin, right now blushing, slightly bashful but her bright eyes like stars, sparkling, a sense of youthful beauty really hit him in the face. Wild Dog suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of inferiority, lowered his head. Xiao Huan glared at her grandfather Tanis Ka. Since young she roamed the world with Tanis Ka, experienced and knowledgeable, naturally more open than ordinary girls. Right now she turned and said to Wild Dog Taoist, "Priest, don't listen to my grandfather's nonsense, a dog's mouth can't spit ivory." Tanis Ka was enraged, said, "You dare to scold grandfather as a dog, obviously that guy is Wild Dog." Xiao Huan stuck out her tongue, made a face at Wild Dog, a sound rang in Wild Dog's mind. He only felt that his eyes were filled with this beautiful face, could not tolerate any other colors. He also did not care about Zhou Yixian's sarcasm. Tanis Ka grumpily turned his head, said to Wild Dog, "Hey, you still haven't said why you want to follow us. If you can give a good reason, I will let you follow. If you can't, I will let you know my power." Wild Dog slowly retracted his gaze, was silent for a long time, said, "I also don't know." Tanis Ka laughed loudly, his face full of disdain. Xiao Huan instead looked at Wild Dog Taoist, said with interest, "Priest, what's wrong? Don't tell me you have no home to return to?" Wild Dog bitterly laughed, said, "You are right." For some reason, right now he seemed to be especially willing to speak in front of this girl. Once the conversation started, he inexplicably continued, "I looked strange since young. After I was born, my parents treated me as a monster and threw me into the wilderness, left me to fend for myself." Xiao Huan covered her mouth with her hand, shocked. Tanis Ka instead rolled his eyes, a look of disbelief. Wild Dog Taoist continued, "Then I was found by a group of wild dogs. They did not finish them, instead they brought food to feed me, so after I became sensible, I have been calling myself Wild Dog." Tanis Ka sneered again, but Xiao Huan was focused, nodded slightly. Wild Dog Taoist ignored Tanis Ka, smiled to Xiao Huan and said, "So I have no home since young. If I must say, the dog kennel is my home. Then a predecessor of Blood Forger Hall met me by chance, in a moment of pity, took me in and taught me Tao. From then on, I treated Blood Forger Hall as my home." Tanis Ka sneered, "Then you should go back to Blood Forger Hall. Why are you still loitering outside all day?" Wild Dog Taoist lowered his head, his face gloomy, after a long while said, "Blood Forger Hall has already been destroyed by Ghost King sect. The one leading them is that ghostly you have met before." "What?" Tanis Ka and Xiao Huan were shocked at the same time. The evil sect's internal strife was fierce and cruel, but they did not announce it to the outside world. So Tanis Ka and the rest did not know about Ghost King sect annexing Blood Forger Hall. But shocked at the same time, both of their reactions were different. Tanis Ka frowned, seemed to think of something. After a long while he shook his head and sighed, said, "What a pity, when Elder Blackheart was still here, Blood Forger Hall was so powerful." Sigh. Xiao Huan did not think so much, but after the shock, she thought of something, said, "Is it that ghostly brought people to destroy all of you? Then why are you still following him?" The corner of Wild Dog Taoist's mouth twitched. He slowly narrated what had happened. Xiao Huan heard, snorted, said to Tanis Ka, "Nian leader and those people, they really have no backbone." Tanis Ka stared at her, said, "You are so young, what do you know about backbone? If it is a life and death situation, that backbone is not something everyone has." Xiao Huan's mouth twitched, said, "Then this Wild Dog Taoist would rather die than surrender?" Tanis Ka glanced at Wild Dog, nodded his head and said, "I did not know that you actually have such backbone, not simple. But these few years, that ghostly is known as Shui Gongzi, killed innumerable people. Why did he let you off?" Wild Dog Taoist shook his head, said, "I also do not know." Tanis Ka did not speak. His eyes seemed to be in deep thought. His usual cheeky face instead gradually disappeared. Wild Dog Taoist saw Tanis Ka suddenly revealing such an expression, very different from his usual self, couldn't help but was startled, but at the same time, Xiao Huan spoke, attracted his attention. Xiao Huan glanced at him, quietly said, "Then you follow him all day, don't you feel uncomfortable?" He destroyed Blood Forger Hall, which had treated you with great kindness. You must hate him very much, right? Wild Dog was at a loss, after which he was silent. After a long while he slowly shook his head, blankly said, I also do not know. Originally I hated that person to the core, but these days, I slowly thought, actually what is the use of blaming him? Even if it was not him, not Ghost King sect, Wandu clan and He-Huan sect would still do the same thing. Ghost King sect is just one step ahead. Xiao Huan did not speak. Tanis Ka instead first made a sound of surprise, reassessed Wild Dog Taoist from head to toe, looking at him in a new light. You can actually think of this, I have underestimated you. Wild Dog Taoist rolled his eyes at Tanis Ka, clearly not interested in Tanis Ka's praise. Tanis Ka was snubbed. He laughed, actually not angry. Wild Dog Taoist glanced at Xiao Huan, saw her bright eyes like water. The ripples in her eyes seemed to be flowing, really captivating for some reason. He did not dare to look any more, lowered his head and said, That day after coming out from the Death Marsh, I was extremely vexed, staying with that group of Ghost King sect people, especially occasionally I would see Nyen Leader and the rest. Just happened to see you all, I also don't know why, followed you all. He suddenly seemed to have thought of something, quickly raised his head, said to Xiao Huan, But I definitely do not have any intention of harming you all. I myself also don't know why, probably just casually strolling. If you are not willing, I will leave now. Xiao Huan smiled and said, Doesn't matter, I don't mind. Then you can follow us from now on, anyway the world is so big, I think you have nowhere to go. Tanis Ka was shocked, pulled Xiao Huan over and said in a low voice, Stupid girl, why did you randomly make this guy follow us? Xiao Huan rolled her eyes at her grandpa, said, What this guy and that guy, he has a name. Besides, he has no evil intentions, just following us for a stroll. What is there to be afraid of? Tanis Ka angrily said, You this girl don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He is a notorious person in the evil sect, heard that in the past he. Tanis Ka suddenly stopped. Xiao Huan stared at him and said, What about him in the past? Tell me, what heinous crimes have you heard of him doing before? Tanis Ka scratched his head, thought for a long time, embarrassedly said, Seems like I didn't hear what he did. Xiao Huan burst out laughing, was about to turn around. Tanis Ka pulled Xiao Huan, said, But it is not good for you to let this person follow us. Why do you want to do this? Xiao Huan lightly said, Seems like last night when we passed by the barren hill, a wild boar came out from the roadside. Grandpa, you were hiding far away. It was this priest who rushed up and chased the wild boar away, or else a weak girl like me would have to face a big wild boar alone. Tanis Ka blushed, said, I am old and weak, how can I stop a big wild boar? Besides, are you a weak girl, not to mention a wild boar? Even if a tiger came, you will still. Xiao Huan suddenly coughed. Tanis Ka did not continue. Chapter 203. Xiao Huan turned, smiled sweetly at Wild Dog Taoist, said, Priest, then please take care of me in future. Wild Dog quickly stood up, said, No problem, if there is any rough work, just let me do it. Tanis Ka snorted from afar. At this moment, suddenly a cold and calm voice was heard outside the pavilion, said, So you came here. Wild Dog Taoist's body shook, turned his head to look. Xiao Huan had already cried out, Ah, it's you. On the ancient path outside the pavilion, stood a young man, expressionless, a gray monkey on his shoulder. It was ghostly. It was the beginning of autumn, although it was noon, but the sun was not as scorching as summer. A cool breeze blew in from outside the pavilion. Just that in the pavilion, the atmosphere with the arrival of Ghostly, this uninvited guest, suddenly turned silent. Wild Dog Taoist's face alternated between red and white, sat at the side, his eyes staring at the ground, looked really nervous. Ghostly was still expressionlessly standing at the other side, did not look at Wild Dog Taoist, instead focused on Tanis Ka. Xiao Huan looked at Wild Dog Taoist and then at Ghostly, after a long while carefully said, En Zhang. Ghostly Gongzi, why are you here? Ghostly glanced at her, said, I am here to look for your grandfather. Tanis Ka was surprised, said, Look for me? Ghostly nodded, said, Yes, I would like to ask Senior a question. Xiao Huan immediately felt relieved, secretly smiled at Wild Dog, told him not to worry, and then turned to Ghostly with interest, said, Ah, you are such a powerful person, what do you want to ask my grandfather? While speaking, she suddenly saw Xiao Hui on Ghostly's shoulder, a pair of round eyes turning, grinning at her. She couldn't help but felt a surge of fondness, smiled and said, Ha, I am the one who gave you the candied haws, do you still remember me? Zzz. The monkey Xiao Hui cried out, nodded incessantly, suddenly jumped up from Ghostly's shoulder, jumped into Xiao Huan's arms. Seemed like this monkey had a good impression of the candied haws. Xiao Huan's smile widened, stretched out her hand to catch it. Unexpectedly it sank, it was unexpectedly heavy, she almost dropped it to the ground. Luckily her reaction was fast and quickly increased her strength before she stabilized her body and carried Xiao Hui. But she was surprised, it had only been a few days and Xiao Hui did not seem to have grown much. How could its weight suddenly increase by almost half? It was really strange. Ghostly watched Xiao Huan teasing Xiao Hui, giggling incessantly at the side, looking very happy. Deep in his eyes, there seemed to be a faint smile but immediately disappeared. He turned and faced Zhou Yixian. Tanis Ka shrugged his shoulders and said, I am an old man who is only 9 buckets tall and knowledgeable, there is nothing in the world that I do not know. But it is strange that you should ask this old man for advice. What's the matter? Just say it. Ghostly ignored his boasting, indifferently said, That day in the Death Marsh, there was a fish-headed monster that ambushed your granddaughter, do you still remember? Tanis Ka was stunned. Wild Dog Taoist and Xiao Huan heard it and looked over at the same time. Xiao Huan, while carrying Xiao Hui, said, Yes, that monster was extremely fierce. If not for Ghostly Gongzi and Pinger sisters' timely help, I would have been killed by it. Ghostly was still looking at Tanis Ka, said, You said that monster was one of the southern border's 63 tribes, the fish people, is it? Tanis Ka was silent for a moment, said, That's right. Ghostly cupped his hands and said, Not sure if Senior knows anything about this fish people tribe? Tanis Ka glanced at Ghostly, said, Why are you suddenly interested in this? Ghostly pondered for a moment, nodded and said, Since I am asking Senior, there is no need to hide the rest from you. After you all left, my men seemed to be ambushed by a group of monsters similar to the fish people, suffered heavy casualties, so I want to find out more from Senior. Tanis Ka frowned, his body gradually straightened. His eyes showed a pondering look, but he did not speak. Ghostly was also not in a hurry, quietly stood at the side. After a long while, Tanis Ka suddenly said, The people who died under your hands, did they die in a cruel way? The corpses were mostly chopped into pieces, too horrible to look at? This soft cry was made by Xiao Huan. Looking at her shocked face, she was obviously very shocked. Ghostly slowly nodded. His eyes looked deeply at the old man in front of him, said, That's right, it is exactly so. Tanis Ka nodded and said, Then it can't be wrong, it must be done by the southern border's 10,000 great mountains, 63 tribes. This tribe had a strange appearance. When it was born, it had a fish head and a human body. According to their tribe's legend, it was the offspring of the ancient fish god and a human girl, so they had always considered themselves as the descendants of the fish god. This tribe has always been cruel and bloodthirsty, and believed that no matter animal or human, after the massacre, only by chopping the corpses into pieces, can the ghost be killed at the same time, to avoid future troubles. So in their hands, no matter animal or human, most of them can't even keep a whole corpse. Suddenly a strange sound came from the side. Both of them looked. Xiao Huan's face was pale, her brows tightly frowned, looked a little nauseous. Tanis Ka shook his head slightly, sighed. The world is so big, there are many more cruel things that you still don't know. Ghostly naturally would not be like Xiao Huan, but he also frowned slightly, said, "How come we have never heard of this kind of savage tribe before?" Tanis Ka indifferently said, "You have always lived in Central Plains, naturally you don't understand this kind of savage tribe. In the southern border 10,000 great mountains, everywhere are dangerous rivers and mountains, the people there eat raw meat and drink blood, completely different from the civilized people in Central Plains. But those tribes have always been used to the place where their ancestors lived, and on the road connecting Central Plains and southern border is one of the three great good sects, Funxiang Valley. Occasionally a few barbarians would run over, but most of them were killed by Funxiang Valley disciples with their celestial skills, so Central Plains has never known the details of the southern border tribes. When I was young, I roamed the world, went to the southern border 10,000 great mountains, then I know a thing or two." Ghostly slowly nodded his head, but the glint in his eyes, gradually brightened, said, "Then according to what Senior has said, occasionally a foreign race coming in, it is still understandable, but for such a large group of foreign races to enter Central Plains without a sound, and even to the Death Marsh which is no less than 10,000 miles from the southern border, it is simply impossible. Unless there is something wrong with Funxiang Valley guarding southern border." Tanis Ka suddenly stretched, lazily said, "That is your problem, I am too lazy to care." Ghostly pondered for a moment, nodded and said, "Thank you, Senior." After speaking, he turned around and saw Xiao Huan hugging Xiao Hui and playing with it. From the corner of her eyes she saw Ghostly looking over, couldn't help but smiled and said, "This monkey of yours is so cute, right? Why did it suddenly become so much heavier, and also, look at its forehead, there is such a deep gray mark, as if it has an extra eye. He, isn't it, monkey?" While speaking, Xiao Huan made a face at Xiao Hui. Xiao Hui grinned and wagged its tail behind it. Ghostly's heart moved. Ever since that day in the Celestial Emperor Treasury, Xiao Hui drank that mysterious liquid and swallowed that strange stone. It was as if drunk and slept for 2 days and 2 nights. After waking up, it did not seem to eat anything, but its weight suddenly increased by a lot and its appearance also gradually started to change. Its fur color became brighter and glossier, especially that gray mark on its forehead. It became more and more obvious. But other than these, Xiao Hui did not have any other changes. It was still the same gluttonous and playful. Initially Ghostly was still worried, but seeing that Xiao Hui did not have any abnormalities, he gradually relaxed. Right now he paused, shifted his gaze to Wild Dog Taoist. Wild Dog Taoist glanced at him. His eyes could not help but show some fear. Ghostly indifferently said, "Do you intend to follow them in the future?" Wild Dog Taoist was silent for a moment, said, "Yes." Ghostly said, "I once told you before, do you still remember, Nian leader, these people will come and find you anytime." Wild Dog Taoist's face was gloomy, but he looked at Xiao Huan, still said, "I know, I also do not care, it was them who betrayed the sect, do they still have the face to come and see me?" Ghostly intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Xiao Huan and then looked away, said, "Since you want to be like this, then it's up to you." Wild Dog Taoist was surprised, raised his head, as if he did not expect Ghostly to be so easy to talk to. Ghostly did not care about him, walked to the side and called out to Xiao Hui. Xiao Hui with a swoosh scuttled down from Xiao Huan's bosom, in a few leaps jumped up to Ghostly's shoulder. Xiao Huan was surprised, felt reluctant and said, "You are leaving just like this?" Ghostly nodded, cupped his hands to Zhou Yixian, and then green light floated up below him, instantly turned into a brilliant green light, charged up to the sky and soon disappeared into the horizon. Watching that person's figure disappear, Wild Dog Taoist suddenly heaved a sigh of relief, as if Ghostly was just standing there. There was an invisible force, pressuring him till he could not breathe. Xiao Huan saw it, and was about to laugh at him, when suddenly she heard a gust of wind behind her, and a gentle voice softly said, "Sister, we meet again." Xiao Huan was surprised. Before she could react, she already laughed out, said, "Pinger sister." Looking back, it was indeed the charming and peerless Jean Pinger, smiling and standing behind her, not knowing when did she appear. Wild Dog Taoist was after all an evil sect member and was fearful of Jean Pinger. His expression looked uncomfortable, but Xiao Huan and Jean Pinger were on good terms. She was delighted to see her, pulled her and laughed non-stop. Jean Pinger, like an elder sister, patted Xiao Huan's head lovingly and then intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the sky, said, "Xiao Huan's sister, the reason I came to find you all today is actually to ask your grandfather a few questions." Xiao Huan, Zhou Yixian including Wild Dog were stunned. Jean Pinger indifferently said to Zhou Yixian, "Regarding the southern border strange tribe fish people, I still have a few questions to consult you." Zhou Yixian was speechless, frowned Jean Pinger's eyes, before she asked, again lightly looked towards the horizon. High up in the sky, among the white clouds, indistinctly a light shuttled through the clouds, gradually heading towards the south. Chapter 204. Late at night. Qing Yun Hill, Small Bamboo Valley. The sky was dark, no moon or stars visible. Endless darkness enveloped Small Bamboo Valley. Lu Sueki, dressed in white, stood alone on the full moon platform behind Small Bamboo Valley. This full moon platform was actually the most famous place in Small Bamboo Valley, together with Qing Yun Hill Tong Tian Peak's Cloud Sea, Rainbow Bridge, listed as one of Qing Yun's 6 sceneries. Full moon. Small Bamboo Valley rear mountain was also covered with dense bamboo forest, but different from Big Bamboo Valley rear mountain's black bamboo. Small Bamboo Valley produced in abundance another type of strange bamboo, tears bamboo. This type of bamboo was emerald green in color, the bamboo body slender and long, having almost half of the bamboo joints, but the bamboo was extremely tough, known as the best in the world. Even ordinary woodcutters could not chop it. But the most famous part of the tears bamboo was that on the emerald green bamboo body, little pink spots, like a gentle lady's sad tear stains, extremely beautiful. And the origin of Small Bamboo Valley's name also came from this. As for the full moon platform, it was actually a lonely cliff suspended in midair. Other than the back half, which was connected to the mountain, most of it was suspended in the air. It was said that when the moonlight was bright at night, the moonlight would slowly rise from the foot of the mountain, slowly climbing up to the full moon platform, and when the moonlight completely illuminated the full moon platform, it was also when the moon was in the sky. And when the full moon platform was at its most beautiful, it was also at that time, the moonlight would suddenly shine brilliantly from the smooth full moon platform rocks, instantly illuminating the entire Small Bamboo Valley, and at that moment, the people standing on the full moon platform, almost like standing in a fairyland, and even more. It was said that on the night of the full moon, which only appeared once every 60 years, it would make people feel as if they were standing on the bright moon. That feeling of excitement really made people yearn for it. But tonight was a dark and windy night. Evidently it was not the time to appreciate full moon's beautiful scenery. Right now, not only this full moon platform at the back of Small Bamboo Valley, even at the front of the mountain where the disciples resided, it was also a patch of darkness. Evidently everyone had already fallen asleep. Only Lu Sueki, for some reason, came to this isolated and desolate place alone. Tianya, which never left her side, was still behind her, gently emitting a gentle blue light in the darkness, illuminating some places around. The cold night wind blew over, gently fluttering her snow-white clothes. At the side of her temples, there were a few strands of soft hair, blown messily by the wind, brushing past her fair face, but she seemed to not notice at all, silently standing at the very front of the cliff of the full moon platform, staring blankly into the distance. The mountain wind gradually became stronger, and her clothes began to flutter in the wind. If one took another step forward, it would be a stretch of darkness, a bottomless abyss. At the edge of the cliff, in the dim light, the woman in white stood alone. Bit by bit, something appeared in the depths of her heart. It was originally a gentle feeling, but how did it slowly turn into sadness? Every hit was like an invisible blade stabbing deep into his heart. The mark engraved in the depths of his heart was actually a person's face. Lovesickness, bone deep in the middle of the night, in a secluded place, she slowly opened her arms. In front of her was the boundless darkness, as if the world was boundless. The wind was so strong, rushing into her bosom seemed to want to tear her apart. The darkness beneath her feet also suddenly stirred. A dark hand stretched out from nowhere, entangled her body, trying to pull her into the abyss. Just that she seemed to be in a daze, only quietly staring, the wind blowing against her frail body, like a lily blooming in the darkness. The night deep. That inexplicable coldness seeped into every inch of her skin. Only her mind was suddenly blazing hot. The tenderness that was hidden deep in her heart was suddenly like a burning flame, bursting forth, and then condensing into a face. Chong Lang, a sharp sound, suddenly rang in the night, reverberated far away. Tianya's celestial sword unsheathed, blossomed with resplendent light in the darkness. The white figure then leapt up, caught Tianya in midair. The biting cold mountain wind abruptly swept up. Accompanying that white figure, on the full moon platform, started an incomparably beautiful sword dance. The autumn water, like falling from the sky, turned into the boundless Milky Way, twisting and turning in the slender hands, flowed joyfully in the night. Sometimes soaring to the sky, sometimes landing, sometimes transforming into silver flowing light, yearning for that peerless face, sometimes scattering into the stars in the sky, shining brightly. Anan on this full moon platform, bit her lips deeply, closed her eyes, her body like drifting with the wind, like fluttering cotton, like a cold flower, dancing out the poignant beauty of this world. She turned into white light, exhausted all her strength, her face so pale, faint beads of perspiration could still be seen, but she still did not stop. Maybe only when her body was tired could she forget everything. So she danced, that figure in the night, serene and beautiful. Ding! A light crisp sound, Tianya's celestial sword slowly fell from her hand. That sharp sword tip completely disregarded the hard rocks, like piercing snow, silently pierced into the rocks. The brilliant and beautiful white figure, slowly lowered, the darkness quietly crept up. Who in the darkness, panting softly. Beads of water, gently dripped down, landed on the rocks. Maybe it was the sweat after exhaustion? She panted softly, and then slowly calmed down, her gaze lifted, but there was a faint sense of loss. Not knowing when, she had danced to the back of the full moon platform. Before her was a stretch of bamboo forest, in front of her was the slender and gentle tears bamboo. Under the faint light, little by little tear stains, like a heartbroken girl. She stared blankly and then suddenly laughed out, laughing soundlessly, seemed to carry some bitterness, following which she did not care about the dust on the ground, did not care about the pure white clothes on her, her back leaning against the tears bamboo, sat on the ground. Looked up at the sky. The firmament was boundless, the night breeze blew over, as if there was a faint familiar smell. She closed her eyes, breathed deeply. So after exhaustion, that face in her heart was even more profound. The past, bit by bit, seemed to be engraved in her heart, unable to be erased. Just like that day outside the Celestial Emperor treasury, he impulsively pulled her hand to save her, completely forgetting his own danger. Her eyes were still closed, but a faint smile appeared on her lips. And then, thinking until she thought of that last moment, the mysterious words that appeared and fluttered around them, she then realized, those words were deeply engraved in her mind. Maybe this way she could forget him? She spoke to her own deep heart, although she herself did not believe it, but her mouth still softly recited, "Heaven and earth heartless, treating all living things as straw dogs." In the deep night, the ancient words like a curse, softly reverberated in the darkness. Qing Yun Hill Tong Tian Peak, Founder's Ancestral Hall. The lighting in the great hall was still the same as usual, appeared somewhat dim. Sect head Reverend Daoxian held 3 incense sticks in his hands, respectfully bowed to the innumerable ancestral tablets, and then stepped forward, inserted the sandalwood incense in his hands into the incense burner on the offering table. Beside him stood that destitute old man who took care of the founder's ancestral hall. The faint yellow light shone on his face. Lines after lines of deep wrinkles seemed to be engraved on his face. Daoxian turned his head. His eyes landed on his face, suddenly said, "You seem to have aged again." That old man was expressionless, indifferently said, "Time rushes people, what's so strange about that?" Daoxian smiled, seemed to want to say something. Suddenly a voice was heard from outside the hall. "Senior, disciple Lin Jingyu has returned, come to pay his respects to Senior." Daoxian frowned slightly, did not speak. That old man unhurriedly took a step forward, but did not walk out of the hall, only raised his voice and said, "It's you, when did you return?" Lin Jingyu respectfully said, "Disciple returned the day before, after reporting to sect head, first returned to Dragon Head Valley to visit head senior brother. Once I am free I came over to pay my respects to Senior." A faint smile seemed to appear on that old man's lips, said, "Oh, so it's like that. Then wait outside for a while, I still have a guest here." Lin Jingyu seemed to be startled. Usually this founder's ancestral hall did not have many visitors. Unexpectedly there was a guest today. But he had trained under this mysterious old man for 10 years, had long treated him as a benevolent teacher, immediately acknowledged and quietly waited at the side. Chapter 205. Reverend Daoxian slowly walked a few steps, stood in the shadows of the great hall, looked out from the door. Under the warm sunlight, Lin Jingyu carrying the dragon slayer sword on his back, dressed in a long robe, a jade belt around his waist, his face handsome, respectfully standing at the side of the founder's ancestral hall, patiently waiting. He quietly watched for a while, said, "This child is a piece of good material, regardless of aptitude or temperament. He is the best of the best." That old man's footsteps looked slow, walked to his side, also looked out, said, "Then why didn't you take him in as your disciple back then?" Reverend Daoxian gazed at Lin Jingyu, who was standing outside the hall. That youth was at his prime, no matter from which angle. He exuded such a vigorous vigor and pressing edge, made people feel that he was different from the others. Reverend Daoxian suddenly smiled, a very, very bland kind of smile, then turned around, faced that old man and said, "Because he is too similar to a person, temperament, expression, even his aptitude, are so similar to that person. If he is by my side, I will not be able to sleep." The facial muscles of the old man beside him seemed to suddenly twitch. Reverend Daoxian turned around, looked at him indifferently after a long time, suddenly shook his head, then smiled and said, "I am joking with you." Before he finished, his brows frowned, then his hand touched his chest, quietly coughed a few times. That old man glanced at his chest, and then looked at Reverend Daoxian's slightly pale face, indifferently said, "It has already been 10 years, your injury is still not healed?" Reverend Daoxian did not speak, but his coughing sounds gradually became louder, and then his expression gradually turned ugly. After a long while, his coughing slowly subsided. Reverend Daoxian heaved a long sigh, turned around, no longer looking at Lin Jingyu outside, walked to the altar that enshrined countless Qing Yun sect founders' memorial tablets, stared blankly for a while, then quietly said, "I also did not expect Zhu Xian's sword's backlash power to be so powerful." That old man slowly walked over, stretched out his hand and took a piece of rag, gently wiped the heavy offering table, said, "The Zhu Xian sword's power is so great, adding the Zhu Xian sword formation, it is enough to defy the heavens. This kind of vicious object goes against the will of heaven. When you use the Zhu Xian ancient sword, you should know." Reverend Daoxian indifferently said, "Of course I know, on the stone tablet in the illusory moon cave, from Master Qin Yi down, every generation of masters have left a strict order, unless it is absolutely necessary, do not use this sword." The old man slowly wiped the offering table. His movements were very slow, as if he had been wiping it for many years. That was why he was so focused. His eyes looked at the table, suddenly smiled and said, "Actually, I have also thought before, maybe if you use the Zhu Xian ancient sword a few more times, maybe you will die even faster than me." Reverend Daoxian looked at that old man's stooped back. His pupils suddenly contracted, after a while, slowly turned and walked out. "Are you leaving?" The old man's bleak voice came from behind him. Reverend Daoxian stopped but did not turn back. After a while, his voice unhurriedly came over, "Do you still remember what I said when I saved you?" That old man stood in the dark shadows, did not reply. Reverend Daoxian also did not turn back. A strange aura seemed to be drifting in this founder's ancestral hall. After a long while, Reverend Daoxian's indifferent voice was heard saying, "I saved you, because I owe you, but I will not let you live longer than me." That old man's body had already disappeared into the shadows, motionless. Reverend Daoxian then walked out, left this founder's ancestral hall. Lin Jingyu was waiting patiently outside, suddenly saw sect head Reverend walking out from the founder's ancestral hall, got a shock and quickly paid his respects. Reverend Daoxian glanced at him. A strange glint seemed to flash in his eyes, and then nodded his head and left. Lin Jingyu watched sect head Reverend leave. For some reason, when Reverend Daoxian came out from the founder's ancestral hall, he suddenly felt that sect head Reverend's face seemed strangely pale. Lin Jingyu was thinking to himself, from the ancestral hall, that old man's voice was heard, unhurriedly said, "Is it Jingyu, come in?" Lin Jingyu hurriedly replied, "Yes." Speaking, he walked into the hall. He had just walked into the hall. Lin Jingyu immediately felt a chill on his body. At the same time the surroundings also turned dark. He couldn't help but frowned. For the past 10 years, he had been following this mysterious old man here to take care of the founder's ancestral hall, but from the day he came, he felt that this founder's ancestral hall was very strange. No matter what it was always gloomy, and yet this place was not completely dark. Instead, before those ancestors' memorial tablets, there were many incense sticks and candles lit, but the dim candles' faint light seemed to only exist to set off the deeper darkness here, unable to rid the great hall of the gloomy and eerie feeling. But he had after all lived here for 10 years, and he admired that old man standing in the shadows even more. He had long forgotten about this strange place. Immediately he respectfully bowed to that old man, said, "Senior, disciple is back." For the past 10 years, Lin Jingyu had more than once wanted to address this old man as teacher, but without exception, he was rejected by this mysterious old man. Therefore Lin Jingyu had always addressed him as senior. Anyway, even sect head Reverend sometimes looked at this old man in a different light. Presumably he must also once be a senior in Qing Yun sect. That old man smiled, walked out from the shadows, assessed Lin Jingyu from head to toe, saw that he had been out for a few months. His face looked weathered, but his entire person was even more spirited. His eyes couldn't help but revealed a slight gratification, harmoniously said, "This time out you didn't get injured, right?" Lin Jingyu smiled and said, "Speaking of injuries, it's not that I didn't get injured, but they were all superficial wounds, not worth mentioning. Just a pity this time out in the death marsh, I returned without any result." Immediately he briefly narrated the death marsh battle. By now the news of the evil faction internal strife, the 3 great sects exterminating Changshan Hall, had already spread throughout the world. Lin Jingyu also heard it on his way back, and now he also told it to this old man. But this old man was obviously not interested in Changshan Hall's survival. When he heard that one of the 4 great sects of the evil faction was exterminated, his expression did not even change, only quietly listened to Lin Jingyu. After Lin Jingyu finished, this old man was silent for a moment, suddenly said, "You said this time the other 3 great sects of the evil faction, including Wandu clan, sent a large number of people over?" Lin Jingyu nodded and said, "Yes." That old man seemed to hesitate for a moment, but eventually still said, "Did you see Tsang Song?" Lin Jingyu's body shook. He was stunned, but then he turned silent, his expression extremely complicated. After a long while he then said, "No, Senior." The old man saw the expression on his face, suddenly said, "Do you hate him very much?" A trace of pain flashed past Lin Jingyu's eyes. He slowly said, "I also don't know, but good and evil cannot coexist. Anyway, even if we meet again, we will already be irreconcilable enemies." "Humph!" That old man suddenly sneered. Lin Jingyu was shocked, said, "Senior, what is it?" That old man slowly shook his head, turned around, his eyes looked up. Reflected in his eyes were the innumerable Qing Yun sect founders' memorial tablets high up, the dim candlelight in front of their memorial tablets. Right now it looked like their eyes, silently watching the people in the ancestral hall. "He brought you up from young, imparted you Taoism skills, taught you how to be a person. In the end he even passed down the Dragon Slayer sword to you. Has he ever done anything wrong to you?" That old man suddenly said indifferently. Lin Jingyu slowly shook his head, quietly said, "He has always been very good to me. In the past I also revered him like a deity, like a father, extremely revered. But—" Lin Jingyu did not continue. That old man also suddenly became silent. After a long time, that old man then gave a bitter laugh, with endless sorrow, facing those memorial tablets and candlelight, quietly said, "Actually, Song Song, he is just a pitiful person who took the wrong path." Chapter 206. The Southern Border Evil Lands. In the extreme south of the Divine Land, it was said that there were barren mountains and unruly rivers, rich in poisonous insects and ferocious beasts. And the most obvious boundary with the Central Plains was in the extreme south. Suddenly, like a flat land rising, lofty majestic mountain ranges connected one after another, towering into the clouds, separating the north and south. Since ancient times, the fertile Central Plains, very few people went to the southern border, for no other reason. First, the roads were steep; second, there were too many ferocious beasts and poisonous insects, miasma and foul waters, and the land was barren, unable to be cultivated. Later on, not knowing when, the world started to spread that in the endless mountains of the southern border, there were all kinds of barbaric tribes. They ate raw meat and drank blood, cruel and bloodthirsty. Among them there were even terrifying beastmen who ate raw human flesh. Since then no one dared to go. Instead the world was shaken, worried day and night that those tribes would one day suddenly run out from those mountains, invade the Central Plains, harm the world. However, there weren't any rumors of the barbarian tribe harming people in the last 1,000 years. Although there were occasional rumors of strange monsters appearing in the southern borderlands, most of them died without a trace, and were gradually forgotten by the people. In this day and age, even for the people living at the border of the southern border, only mothers would say something like, "If you don't listen to me, those monsters from the barbarian tribe will come and catch you," when they were coaxing their children to sleep at night. Usually, no one would think about whether these strange races really existed deep in the mountains, much less in the Central Plains that was thousands of miles away. Speaking of which, that 10,000 great mountains shrouded in layers of fog had now become a place forgotten by the common people. However, even though the commoners had forgotten about these foreign races, there were still some cultivators of the Tao of refinement who had not. No matter good or evil faction, as long as the senior ones were, they would know that the reason why the southern tribes were unable to harm the world for the past 1,000 years, the good faction giant sect, Funxiang Valley, really deserved the credit. 10,000 majestic towering mountains separated the north and south. The Central Plains people were unable to go south. Those barbaric tribes also found it difficult to go north. But 1,000 years ago, an inconceivable lightning catastrophe descended from the sky. Within a radius of 1,000 miles, the common people died and were injured. After the catastrophe, someone discovered that in the lofty mountain range, the tremendous force of the heavenly thunder had actually split open a certain part of the mountain, revealing a pitch-black and gloomy path that was only 3 feet wide. It was also from that time onwards that in the 10,000 great mountains, there were strange barbarians hidden in the world, frequently harassing the people. The common people at the borders suffered unspeakably, until Funxiang Valley appeared. Funxiang Valley among the good faction sects, its origin was the most mysterious and elusive. As early as 1,500 years ago, there were already disciples of this branch roaming the world. Just based on origin, only Qing Yun's sect and evil faction had a longer history than Funxiang Valley. Even Tianyin Temple could not be compared to it. But even so, this sect was usually very low-key. Although a few highly skilled cultivators would appear from time to time, their influence on the world situation was not great. Until 800 years ago, this sect found a valley near the southern border's dark tunnel and settled down. From then on, they called themselves Funxiang Valley, and in these 800 years, inconceivable masters emerged in large numbers, their power flourishing day by day. Until now, they were already on par with Qing Yun's sect and Tianyin Temple, becoming one of the 3 big good faction sections. And correspondingly, Funxiang Valley's current Valley Master Yun Ilan was also a good faction giant who was on par with Qing Yun's sect Reverend Daoxian and Tianyin Temple Puhong Master. Just that this person had always been low-key, and just based on reputation, he could not be compared to the 2 of them. Because of the geographical location, Funxiang Valley almost instinctively took on the responsibility of guarding that dim path that was known locally as Black Hole. From then on, there were no more rumors of the barbarian monsters harassing the common people. Therefore, in the hearts of the local people, Funxiang Valley's reputation was extremely high, and they revered them as immortals. These information were all recorded in the evil faction Ghost King sect. Ghostly had also seen them in these 10 years, and now slowly flipped through them in his mind. Right now it was already the 3rd day after he asked Zhou Yixian about the news of the human fish tribe monsters. He had been rushing all the way and finally reached the vicinity of the 10,000 great mountains. It was already late at night. This night the bright moon hung high in the sky, the clouds were rather thick and few stars could be seen. But the clear moonlight spilled onto the mortal world and also lit up this mountain top where he was at. Ghostly stood on the hill, gazing towards the south, his brows slightly frowning. The monkey Xiao Hui was still crouching on his shoulder, in its hand was a wild fruit plucked from somewhere, munching on it with relish. Along the way, in the first 2 days, he still found the markings left by his subordinate Kill Living Monk, but today, Kill Living Monk had completely disappeared. But from the information he left a few days ago, Kill Living Monk, who was proficient in tracking, had already confirmed that those mysterious human fish tribe were swiftly heading south. Their target was obviously returning to their southern border lair. Could it be Kill Living Monk had already clashed with those mysterious human fish tribe? Ghostly sighed softly, a trace of worry flashed past his eyes. The southern border barbarians were completely different from the Central Plains people. This had been mentioned many times in the Ghost King sect's remnant records. The people there did not know anything about true cultivation, but they seemed to have various kinds of strange witchcraft and strange skills, unimaginable. Kill Living Monk was not old and had a fiery temper, but among the new generation of Ghost King sect disciples, he was indeed an outstanding figure and usually followed Ghostly, was indeed a capable subordinate. This mysterious disappearance, Ghostly was indistinctly worried. Just that right now he was gazing ahead, the dark night was heavy, in the south there was a black figure, as if there was some enormous creature baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in the night. Most likely it was that legendary 10,000 great mountains. And somewhere below that mountain range was the legendary mysterious Funxiang Valley. The southern border had always been Funxiang Valley's sphere of influence. For an evil faction disciple to enter alone, it was needless to say the danger. While Ghostly was deep in thought, suddenly he felt something, looked up at the sky, saw a lonely moon in the horizon, shuttling between the faint black clouds, as if suddenly, it also had some demonic qualities. A dark red light suddenly appeared in the night sky, under the clear moonlight, swept past the horizon, towards a mountain top in the south, descended. Ghostly stared at that strange red light, both of his brows gradually frowned. After a moment he seemed to make up his mind, patted Xiao Hui on his shoulder, and then the green light under his feet returned. The soul-absorbing stick glimmered with faint light, supporting him, and Xiao Hui slowly rose up, suddenly increased its speed, chased after that red light. In the night sky, the black clouds gradually increased, that lonely moon in the horizon, its splendor also gradually dimmed. There seemed to be a kind of special southern border dark demonic air, in this night, becoming thicker and thicker. That mysterious red light flew for a while, landed on a mountain 10 miles south from the mountain where Ghostly was hiding. There were many mountains in the southern border. On the mountains there were also many vegetation, just that in the forest of this nameless small mountain, there was a desolate ancient temple. That red light landed in front of the ancient temple, a wave of light wavered, a withered old man appeared. He looked around. After making sure there was no one, he walked into the ancient temple. Desolate mountains and wild ridges, a desolate ancient temple, yet someone came here in the middle of the night. Naturally there was something unspeakable. After a while, in the shadows of the forest outside the ancient temple, Ghost Li's figure slowly appeared. His eyes assessed this nameless ancient temple, and then looked up at the sky. The dark clouds in the night sky thickened, gradually covering the moonlight. His figure flickered as he silently swept towards the ancient temple. This ancient temple had obviously been abandoned for a long time. Broken fences and walls were everywhere. Even the main hall looked extremely damaged from the outside, with holes everywhere. The night breeze blew over coldly, the broken windows creaked and swayed. The low sounds in the night seemed especially desolate and indistinctly strange. Bo! A light sound, as if someone had lit a match. A weak light lit up in the main hall, just that this light was dim, and could only light up a little in the main hall. Slightly further away, it was still shrouded in darkness. G. Suddenly, a wave of strange and indescribable sounds suddenly resounded in the hall. This sound was like the cries of ghosts in the middle of the night, and it was like the nocturnal movement of venomous insects. It instantly caused one's heart to go numb and feel extremely uncomfortable. Ghostly concealed himself in the darkness, quietly looked into the main hall. Under the dim light in the main hall, other than that old man, there were 2 other people. One of them looked about 30 years old, medium build, the other one, rather tall, but for some reason, his entire body was wrapped tightly in a cloak. Not even a bit of his head was revealed, and that strange sound was actually coming from under this person's cloak. The sound reverberated in the dark ancient temple, becoming more and more demonic, like an evil ghost awakening. Ghostly watched coldly. It was also the first time he heard such strange words. Naturally he did not know what it meant, but looking at the other 2 people's expressions, he knew there would be an outcome. As expected, after that mysterious person spoke for a while, he temporarily stopped. The middle-aged man beside him, who had been listening attentively, turned to the old man and said, "Tribe leader said, this time we returned without any achievement. Instead our tribe lost manpower and exposed our tracks. It is all because of your inaccurate information." After the beast deity King heard, he already flew into a rage. When that middle-aged man said the 2 words beast deity, his voice suddenly turned low, and that tall figure wrapped in the cloak also seemed to tremble. That old man also frowned and said, "Our original agreement was to inform the beast deity King of the location of that celestial Emperor Ming stone. According to what we know, that strange stone is indeed in the celestial Emperor treasury in the Death Marsh. How can we blame our inaccurate information?" Chapter 207. He looked at that mysterious person under the cloak. A sneer suddenly flashed past his lips and said, "I'm afraid it is you all who are not capable enough? Once the words were spoken, that mysterious person in the cloak immediately replied, G. This kind of strange sound was repeated over and over again, although Ghostly, who was hiding at the side, did not understand the meaning, but from the hurried and sharp sounds, it was obvious that the mysterious person was enraged. This mysterious person spoke for quite a while. The expression of the middle-aged man who was translating also gradually became unsightly. After waiting for him to stop with great difficulty, the middle-aged man hesitated for a moment before saying, Clan leader said, although they have never been to the Deathly Swamp, they also know that it has never been inhabited. But this time there are suddenly countless cultivation experts from Central Plains. Naturally your information is wrong. That elderly saw that the middle-aged man seemed to have finished speaking and could not help but was stunned. That mysterious person spoke for a long time, but when this middle-aged man translated, it was only this sentence: most likely that the mysterious person in the middle had cursed, and this middle-aged man was unwilling to translate. That elderly hesitated for a moment, looked like he was still unwilling to fall out with the mysterious person, and said, this time the appearance of the Celestial Emperor Treasury, the omen is grand and shook the world. Most likely those Central Plains high-skilled cultivators also heard the news and went over. This is not something we can control. That mysterious person in the cloak was still angry and made another series of strange sounds. The middle-aged man listened attentively and nodded his head repeatedly, and then said to the elderly, tribe leader said, that Celestial Emperor Ming stone is extremely important to the Beast Deity King. The stakes are very high. This time they returned without any results. The Beast Deity King flew into a rage and killed a few of his tribesmen on the spot. That elderly heard until here. His face turned solemn, as if his mood was heavy, but a trace of ridicule still could not help but flash past. The person in the middle continued to translate, so please quickly find out whose hands this gem had landed in, so that they can once again retrieve it and offer it to the Beast Deity King. Ghostly, who was hiding at the side, suddenly had a thought. He heard them mentioning the Celestial Emperor Ming stone a few times. Could it be that it was the strange stone that was swallowed by Xiaohui? That elderly was silent for a moment and then nodded and said, all right, leave this matter to us. Within 3 days, we will give you an answer. The mysterious person snorted, said a few words. That middle-aged man nodded to the elderly and said, tribe leader agreed, said after 3 days, we will meet again here. The old man nodded, and was about to say something when the mysterious person turned around and walked out directly. He didn't spare them a glance at all, and he was extremely arrogant and rude. The old man's expression changed as he looked at the back of the mysterious man. The middle-aged man hurriedly pulled him back and shook his head. The old man glanced at the middle-aged man and endured it. After the mysterious man's tall figure disappeared into the darkness, the old man suddenly spat and cursed. What are you? Just a bunch of animals. The middle-aged man smiled apologetically and said, teacher uncle, don't be angry, don't lower yourself to their level. That elderly sneered and said, I can't be bothered with them. He turned and glanced at him, said, speaking of which, son too, you have lived among those animals for 3 years, learning their bird language. I'm afraid you must have suffered a lot, right? The middle-aged man who was called Sun Tu smiled and said, disciple has received the sex kindness, but unfortunately my aptitude is shallow and I am struggling to repay Valleyhead and the various teacher uncles' kindness. Now that I have this opportunity, disciple dare not to do my best. Ghostly suddenly heard the 2 words Valleyhead. His heart immediately turned cold. That teacher uncle instead smiled, seemed to be very approving, patted Suantu's shoulder, suddenly sneered and said, luckily Valleyhead is wise, knowing that I have always been composed, so he sent me to meet with those animals. If it was Shangguan Su, that old fellow, he would have spoiled everything on the spot. Sun Tu laughed dryly. His expression turned a little strange. His mouth mumbled a reply, but he seemed to not dare to talk about that Shangguan Su behind his back. Ghostly at the side did not question further. Shangguan Su was one of the top figures in the southern Fenxiang Valley, although he had never roamed the world, but his reputation had long been established. Especially during the Qing Yun battle 10 years ago, Ghost King, even more ingenious, sent Zhou to disguise as Shangguan Su to ambush the Tian'an temple monks. It was indeed successful, and almost put Qing Yun, Tian'an two big sects, to death. At that time Ghostly was still a Qing Yun disciple called Zhang Xiaofan, and was at the scene. Naturally he had a deep impression of that name. Hearing the two of them calling that mysterious person animal, that mysterious person's identity seemed to be on the verge of being revealed, just that Fenxiang Valley which had always been awe-inspiring and righteous, right now actually revealed an unbelievably evil air. Ghostly coldly stared at the two people in the great hall, in the darkness, a cold and disdainful sneer on his lips. In the hall, the two of them discussed for a while more. Sun Tu blew out the candles in the great hall. The two of them walked out, seemed like they wanted to leave this place. Ghostly frowned in the dark. When he was pondering, suddenly, a strange roar was heard from outside the ancient temple. Everyone in the ancient temple was shocked. That elder and Sun Tu stopped at the same time. The voice was mournful and angry, and it seemed to carry a trace of panic, but it sounded like some beast's roar and not a human's cry. Just that Ghostly tried to make sense of it. Immediately he could tell that the voice seemed to be made by that mysterious person in the cloak. His brows involuntarily frowned. At the same time, the elder and Sun Tu also heard it. Immediately their countenances changed greatly, at the same time leapt into the air, and flew out of the temple. Deep in the wild mountains there was actually someone ambushing. The moonlight was cold, as if the evil color became heavier. Outside the ancient temple, behind a hill far away, a purple light suddenly blossomed in the night, charged to mid-air and then struck down. Separated by several zhangs, Ghostly could also feel that piercingly cold malevolent energy. His pupils shrank. In a moment he already recognized what that weapon was. The two Fenxiang Valley people flew over, but that elder's skills were obviously much higher than Sun Tu. In a short while he was already several zhangs behind Sun Tu. At the same time a dark red celestial sword appeared in his hand, swiftly flew towards that purple light. Just that before he could reach the back of the hill, a loud roar was heard, filled with despair, reverberated in this dark night. That elder's countenance changed greatly. His steps became even faster. With a sound he had already flown over, Ghostly quietly followed from another direction, circled to the back of the hill. A bloody stench immediately hit him in the face. The cloak that had been cut in half slowly floated down from the air, dark red blood splattering everywhere. The mysterious figure who had revealed his true body was indeed a fish-headed, human-bodied murloc, but at this moment, he was actually cut in half from head to crotch with a single slash. The corpse fell to the ground, but the murderer had already disappeared. That elder was shocked and angry at the same time. This murderer killed in an instant and then disappeared. This level of skills was really not to be underestimated. Although he did not like these fish people, but he knew that the Valley Master and these barbarians had important matters to discuss. This time someone actually attacked and killed under his eyes. If the other side pursued the matter, it would be hard for him to explain. At this time Sun Tu also rushed to the scene, saw this bloody scene and was immediately dumbstruck. The old man's face was extremely ugly. He suddenly soared up, the dark red light supporting his feet. He flew into the air and looked around, but all he could see was darkness. In the vast forest, where could he find the murderer? Suddenly, he loudly shouted, "Which expert is here? Please come out, Fenxiang Valley Lu Shun will consult." This voice traveled far. After a while, in the forest and mountains, indistinctly echoed back, everywhere, "Lu Shun will consult. Lu Shun will consult." Just that. Other than that, there was no other sound. Lu Shun's eyes looked like they were about to spit fire. After a while he landed, spoke to Sun Tu swiftly. "You clean up the tribe leader's body and bring it back to the valley. The murderer did it not long ago. He must still be nearby. Even if I have to dig 3 chi underground, I will find this person. Sun Tu hurriedly nodded, said, Teacher uncle, be careful. Before he finished, Lu Shun had already leapt up, disappeared into the darkness of the forest. Sun Tu turned around, looked at the 2 halves of the corpse on the ground. A bloody stench assailed his nostrils. He could not help but revealed a disgusted expression, spat. Ghostly slowly retreated, pondered for a moment in the dark and carefully surveyed the surrounding terrain, following which his gaze landed on the ancient temple that he had just come out from, immediately quietly swept over. The night was cold, the dark clouds covered the moon. Although it had only been a while but inside this ancient temple, it suddenly seemed to turn gloomy and dark. Only the occasional moonlight peeking out from the dark clouds would illuminate some places, but after a while, it returned to darkness again. Ghostly unhurriedly walked out, stood on the empty space in front of the great hall, a pair of eyes staring intently at the great hall. The cold wind blew, the broken window made a strange creaking sound in the darkness. Gongzi is really powerful. I can hide from Lu Shun, but I can't hide from you. In the darkness of the great hall, a faint voice suddenly sounded, gently drifting out. Chapter 208. Majestic Fox Mountain. Ghost King Sect Headquarters. Under the desolate mountain, Ghost King Sect Headquarters was hidden in a hard rock cave. In the winding tunnel, at a serene place, the long tunnel was empty. Only on both sides of the stone walls, every few zhongs, a copper lamp embedded, illuminating the place. Yu Ji, with her face covered in black veil, her figure drifted, walking forward alone. Looking from afar, she looked like a ghost in the darkness. This place was already Ghost King Sect's restricted area, together with the cold ice cave where Bai Yao was. It was the most mysterious place in Ghost King Sect, forbidden to ordinary disciples. But Yu Ji, as one of the 4 holy envoys, Vermilion Bird Identity, was one of the core members of Ghost King Sect, therefore she could freely enter these places. Just that, she looked ahead at that faintly extending, as if it was an endless deep tunnel. Her footsteps suddenly slowed down, looking like she was hesitating, but eventually still walked in. Deep in the shadows ahead, a few strange low growls seemed to be heard, like some beast growls. After walking through another long tunnel, the lights on both sides were getting dimmer and dimmer. Finally, after turning a corner, Yu Chi reached the end of the tunnel. There was a stone door with 3 words engraved on the lintel. Entrap Dragon Watchtower. Yu Ji stared at the 3 words for a long time. The surroundings were quiet, only the strange growls that were heard from time to time gradually became clearer. In the air, a faint smell of blood seemed to pervade. The black veil on her face moved, seemed to be shaking her head, softly sighed, and then walked into this stone door. Once inside, the space suddenly widened. Inside was actually an enormous grotto. Strange rocks protruded abruptly on the walls, all of different shapes. And in front of Yuji's stone door was a suspended stone path, winding forward, leading to the middle of the grotto. At this moment she was actually in the air above this huge stone cave. Yuji obviously was not her first time here. Seeing such a scene, she did not show any surprise. After a moment of silence, walked along that narrow stone path. The upper part of the grotto was dark, but below the stone path, red light indistinctly glimmered, reflected up, instead made the upper part of the grotto walls look sinister. The smell of blood in the air was getting heavier. It was unknown whether the stone path in this huge cave was naturally formed or man-made. It just hung in the air like this. From afar, there was not a single stone pillar supporting it. It was really unimaginable. Yuji's black figure walked on the stone path. There was not a single sound of footsteps as she walked. It really gave off a ghostly atmosphere. But not long after, she saw the figure in front of her. Ghost King. At the end of the stone path, there was a 7-chi stone platform. Ghost King was standing on it, his hands clasped behind his back, looking at him from behind. His figure was steady and heavy, as if he had a strange feeling of blending with this huge grotto. Yu-Chi walked to his back and said in a low voice, "Sovereign." Ghost King turned around, nodded, smiled and said, "You are here." The black veil covering Yu-Chi's face suddenly froze, as if she was startled. When the stone path reached this platform, it was considered to be the end. Ahead was an empty space. Correspondingly, the mysterious red light at the bottom of the grotto looked much brighter from here. When the Ghost King turned his head, the red light instantly shot out from his body, indistinctly making his face a little blurry. Even his eyes seemed to have a faint red glow. Ghost King did not seem to notice these, only said, "You come over." Yuji walked over and stood on the platform. Immediately her eyes lit up. Without the stone path blocking, everything at the bottom of the grotto could be seen clearly. Below this grotto was actually a huge blood pool. Fresh red blood filled the bottom of the huge grotto. She really did not know where did Ghost King sect get so much fresh blood from. The thick smell of blood in the air must have come from below. In the blood pool, two huge beasts were soaking. One was the yellow bird from the Death Marsh, the other was the Eastern Sea Lubo Hills rare beast Kuenyo. More than half of these two ancient beasts' bodies were soaked in the blood water. At the same time, from the top of the blood pool, a dark red light shrouded their bodies. The place where the dark red light came from was the hidden dragon cauldron, which was suspended in the air by an unknown force. The location of the hidden dragon cauldron was quite far from where Ghost King and Yuji were standing, but Yuji could still see a black figure casting spells on the cauldron, just that it was blurry under the cover of the red light. But even so, she still knew who that was, Mr. Ghost, the most mysterious figure in evil sect Ghost King sect. Yuji, as one of the four great holy envoys of Ghost King sect in the previous generation, knew almost everything in Ghost King sect like the back of her hand, but only this Mr. Ghost was an exception. The reason was very simple: this person was not originally from Ghost King sect. But after the current Ghost King ascended to the position, a mysterious figure suddenly appeared beside him. Ghost King was extremely respectful to him, and this mysterious figure, in the few times he made a move, the strange skills he displayed, also moved Qinglong, Yuji and the other Ghost King sect experts. But in Yuji's heart, she always had a deep vigilance against this person. The most important reason was, under Mr. Ghost's great push, Ghost King finally 10 years ago, started to activate the Four Divinities Blood Formation. Ghost King sect guarding magical weapon, hidden dragon cauldron. Its origin was mysterious and unfathomable, contained limitless spiritual power, neither good nor evil, extremely strange. And on the hidden dragon cauldron, other than ancient patterns, there were also many mysterious inscriptions. Generations of Ghost King sect founders were unable to decipher them. But in the current Ghost King's generation, his mind was all-encompassing, really a rare talent, and coincidentally, Mr. Ghost, who seemed to specialize in this kind of mysterious inscriptions, suddenly appeared beside him. The two of them together actually deciphered these mysterious inscriptions. The inscriptions on the hidden dragon cauldron recorded a kind of strange formation called Four Divinities Blood Formation. It required the spiritual power of four kinds of strange beasts from the ancient prehistoric times to trigger the hidden dragon cauldron's own strange power, and then become an unparalleled powerful formation. According to the ancient cauldron inscriptions, once this Four Divinities Blood Formation was formed, its power was enough to destroy heaven and earth. Ghost King was a man of great talent and bold vision. Naturally, he would not turn a blind eye to this kind of powerful force, and in the Qing Yun battle 10 years ago, Qing Yun sect Zhu Xian sword formation's prowess shook the world. It was invincible, it was not something a human could withstand. Ghost King carefully pondered. Only this Four Divinities Blood Formation had the possibility of defeating the Zhu Xian sword formation. From then on, all of Ghost King sect's actions started to revolve around the Four Divinities Blood Formation. Yuji looked away from Mr. Ghost's indistinct figure, looked at the two spiritual beasts in the blood pool. Although surrounded by the blood water, the yellow bird that had lived for who knows how many years was clearly unwilling to give up. From time to time it made an angry clear cry, both of its wings flapped, immediately causing huge waves in the surrounding blood water. Just that the blood water in the blood pool seemed to have a strange restraining effect on it, the yellow bird's spiritual power was clearly far from what it used to be, especially above its head. There was a dark red light from the hidden dragon cauldron enveloping it. Once the yellow bird moved, this dark red light immediately brightened, the yellow bird that was enveloped by it immediately like being pressed down by Mount Tai, its body that had just lifted up immediately like being pressed down by an unparalleled gravity. After a few rounds, the yellow bird's movements also gradually slowed down, although it was still resisting, but it was becoming more and more powerless. And at the other end of the blood pool, the one-legged gigantic body strange beast Kuei Nyo was immersed in the blood pool, motionless, only its eyes occasionally glanced at the yellow bird, not knowing if it was because it had been trapped here for too long, it had completely given up resisting. Looking at these two originally arrogant spiritual beasts actually ended up like this, Yuji couldn't help but frown slightly under the black veil, an inexplicable revulsion in her heart. Ghost King, who was standing beside her, seemed to sense something, looked at her and suddenly said, "What are you thinking about?" Yuji was surprised and then calmed down, faintly said, "Nothing, sect head." Ghost King looked at her and then shifted his eyes to the blood pool. After a long while he slowly said, "Now that the four divinities' blood formation is already half completed, as long as we find the other two spiritual beasts as bait, the day our Ghost King sect dominates the world is just around the corner." Yuji was silent for a moment, softly said, "Yes." Ghost King clasped his hands behind his back. His eyes still did not leave the two spiritual beasts in the blood pool. He suddenly changed the topic and said, "You reached the Death Marsh earlier than me. I instructed you to secretly observe Ghostly. Do you have anything to say to me?" Yuji's black veil moved slightly. After a moment, she said, "In the Death Marsh, he led his men to contend with Wandu clan, He-Huan sect and the Good faction. In that complicated and secretive, murderous situation, he was still able to advance and retreat, and finally joined hands with others to exterminate Changshan Hall. He really has the talent of a great general." And speaking till here, she suddenly paused. Ghost King was slightly surprised and said, "How?" Yuji hesitated for a moment and said, "In the inner marsh, he suddenly sneaked an attack and severely injured Wandu clan's Qin Wuyan. His mind is persevering and ruthless, cannot be underestimated." While speaking, Yuji suddenly felt absent-minded. This person that she was talking about, was he really that Zhang Xiaofan? That person that Bai Yao truly loved, was really him? Ghost King instead seemed to be satisfied, nodded and said, "This child's character is persevering and resolute, indeed a rare talent. These few years he had been practicing our holy sect's skills, and also has the world's unparalleled evil weapon with him day and night. His character is a little violent and bloodthirsty, it is also considered normal." Yuji raised her head and looked at Ghost King. There was a faint smile at the corner of his mouth, but contrasted with his dignified face, it revealed a chill. "But," Ghost King suddenly said, "I heard that Ghostly in the Death Marsh, when he met those Good faction people, especially when he met a Qing Yun disciple called Anan, his condition was a little strange. Is there such a thing?" Chapter 209. Yuji's body shook, but she saw Ghost King's indifferent face, unable to tell what he was thinking, just that her heart for some reason, was in a mess. She and Qing Long secretly sneaked into the Death Marsh. Ghostly and Lu Sueki had some subtle relationship, she saw most of it in the dark. Just that thinking about it now, she felt an inexplicable heartache, like a sharp needle, pierced into her heart. "What is it?" Ghost King turned his head and looked at Yuji. Yuji slowly lowered her head. Because of the black veil, nobody could see her expression. The next moment, her voice for some reason, seemed to be hoarse but still very clear and cold, answered Ghost King. Yes, he and Qing Yun's sect Lu Sweki indeed have some ambiguous relationship. I saw with my own eyes outside the Celestial Emperor treasury, facing the black water mystical viper. He risked his life to save that girl's life. Ghost King did not speak again, but in the next moment, the surrounding stench of blood suddenly became 10 times, 100 times thicker. That man was still standing with his hands clasped behind, but not knowing if it was because of the red light from the bottom of the grotto, the red glow in his eyes, abruptly intensified. Yuji slowly bowed to Ghost King, walked towards the back, slowly walked out of this indistinctly suffocating grotto. Just that she had just walked to that stone door, suddenly she was stunned. Qing Long quietly stood outside the stone door, indifferently looked at her. Yuji met his gaze, both of them looked at each other like that, did not speak for a long time. After a long time, Qing Long unhurriedly walked forward, brushed past her and walked deeper into the grotto, leaving Yuji alone, standing in a daze in the tunnel. From the beginning to the end, he did not speak a single word to Yuji. The southern border serene moon, hanging alone in the western horizon. Deep in the ancient temple, the mournful cries of the insects, a desolate and gloomy scene. Who? A whistling sound, a flash of light, Lu Shun rode his sword and flew over, landed in this ancient temple courtyard, both of his eyes glinted. Minute by minute he carefully scanned this ancient temple main hall. He had already ridden his sword to search the surrounding 10 miles, but to no avail, did not see a single person. After thinking, he suddenly realized that this ancient temple was instead the place that he had neglected. The night wind was cold. Even the main door of the abandoned hall had disappeared. Although LV Shun had been talking to someone in the hall not long ago. However, when he looked at it now, it suddenly became gloomy, as if there was something spying on him in the darkness. His palms suddenly broke out in cold sweat. The fish-headed monster that had just died was the clan leader of the southern barbarian merman tribe. Now that he was assassinated when he was meeting with him, he really couldn't escape responsibility. He was well aware that the southern barbaric tribes and his own sect had a secret relationship in secret, and he was even more aware of the terror and cruelty of those barbaric tribes. If he didn't give the barbaric tribes an explanation this time, then he would probably have to suffer. But based on his understanding of the southern barbaric tribes, the battle prowess of these merfolk was not to be underestimated. Even though they were still inferior to a cultivator with profound cultivation like himself, but to want to kill them in one move, this sniper's Dao skill was probably not inferior to himself. Lu Shun took a deep breath and suddenly said in a loud voice, "Which master is it? Please come out and talk." Talk. Talk. The night wind carried the end of his words, gently drifted in the ancient temple. Just that the hall was still silent, no sound at all. Lu Shun's face darkened, clenched his teeth, the celestial sword in his hand glowed brightly. He became one with the sword and charged into the hall. The next moment the hall brightened up. But at the same time when his figure just entered the hall, at the side of the broken walls, 2 black figures swiftly left the hall and entered the dark shadows at the side, without a sound. After a long while, Lu Shun could be heard rummaging around in the hall. After a long while, he still walked out dejectedly, evidently to no avail. He stood on the steps, his expression uncertain. After a long time, he stomped his feet and sighed. "Forget it, forget it." Speaking, he kept shaking his head and then rode his sword up, headed towards the south and disappeared without a trace in a short while. The ancient temple immediately quietened down. The cries of the insects that had disappeared due to Lu Shun's fright sounded again. The cold moon and cool breeze, it was another desolate scene. Just that after Lu Shun disappeared for a long time, this ancient temple seemed to have lost its vitality. There was still no movement. After a while, suddenly a sharp whistle was heard in the air. The red sword light suddenly charged down from the clouds, swiftly landed in the courtyard of the ancient temple, swayed a few times and revealed Lu Shun's figure. His return this time was actually an empty city stratagem, pretending to flee far away but turned back from afar, hiding in the dark clouds in the sky. Unfortunately, even so, there was still no one in the ancient temple. Lu Shun finally revealed a dispirited expression, gave a long sigh. After a moment of silence, he again rode his sword up and flew towards the south. After that, there was no trace of him again. Seemed like this time he really left. In the ancient temple, peace was once again restored, but the next moment, two black figures swayed and slowly appeared. The person in front slowly walked into the courtyard, the moonlight like water, coldly spilled down, casting his figure on the dilapidated bluestone courtyard, drawing out a slender shadow. It was ghostly. Looking up, gazing at the moon. The moonlight was clear and cold, shining on his face. Suddenly, he looked as if he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. Even the monkey Xiao Hui, who was crouching on his shoulder, seemed to be silent, like its master, quietly looking up at the moon. Why, does Gongzi like this southern border moonlight? Suddenly, the graceful figure behind him, who was still hidden in the shadows, let out a sweet and gentle voice that entered his ears. Ghostly slowly looked away but did not turn back, also did not answer the lady's question, instead asked, "Why did you kill that human fish?" That lady, who was still hidden in the shadows, made a light laugh and said, "Those human fish not only harmed Gongzi's subordinates, they also harmed my subordinates. I did it for Gongzi's sake." Ghost Li's expression did not change at all. Clearly he did not believe those words, indifferently said, "I have long heard that purple light blade is a 9 heavens celestial weapon. Today in lady's hands, it really has unfathomable power." That lady laughed lightly, her voice was gentle and sweet. In this desolate night, it suddenly seemed to add a few colors, becoming lively. Footsteps were heard, she unhurriedly walked out from the shadows. It was evil sect Hehuan's sect, known as Miao Gongzi Jin Pinger. Under the moonlight, she was still dressed in a light yellow robe. The soft lapels of her robe swayed gently in the night wind. There were even a few strands of hair hanging down from her temples. It was slightly messy, but it seemed to have an indescribable allure to it. Deep in the mountains, ancient temple, cold night beauty. Right now, her eyes were like water. Between her brows there seemed to be a painting of spring, elegant and beautiful. For a moment, even this night, seemed to have turned gentle. Ghostly turned around, his eyes looked at her face. Jean Pinger still had a smile on her lips, gently said, "Gongzi, you have a rare treasure. It is sinister orb and absorbing soul, combined into one, my little purple light blade. How can I dare to compare with your absorbing soul?" A red glint flashed past Ghost Li's eyes, but his expression did not change, said, "Lady's trip to the south this time, is it also to investigate these human fish tribes?" Jean Pinger nodded slightly, and then her eyes moved, said, "But I did not expect this matter to be related to Fenxiang Valley." Ghostly glanced at her, did not speak, but in his heart he became more and more wary of this girl. Just now she suddenly attacked the human fish tribe leader. This level of skills seemed to be much higher than that day in the Death Marsh, when she attacked Chang Shen Hall Yuyang Zi with him and Qin Wuyan, the three of them. Most likely she did not use her full strength that day. Just that this level of skills was still secondary, he also had a backup plan that day. But Jean Pinger killing the human fish people was clearly framing Fenxiang Valley, instigating the secret collusion between the barbaric tribes and Fenxiang Valley. This girl's scheming was deep, her methods ruthless. It was really not a small matter. Jean Pinger's eyes turned a few times on Ghostly, suddenly smiled and said, "Gongzi, this trip to the south, it must be to investigate these human fish people. I wonder what you have discovered?" Ghostly indifferently said, "Nothing." Jean Pinger heard his cold reply but was not angry. Instead her smile became even more gentle, said, "Just that now we already know that Fenxiang Valley seems to have secret dealings with these barbaric monsters. I wonder what Gongzi's plan is?" Ghost Li's eyes glimmered, said, "What does Miss think?" Jean Pinger smiled and said, I am the one who asked Gongzi first. Ghostly heard her retorting, frowned, innumerable thoughts already running through his mind, this time suddenly discovering that Fenxiang Valley was actually secretly colluding with the southern barbaric tribes. It was really a sensational big matter. If it was spread to the world, most likely those good faction people would be dumbstruck. Under such circumstances, the best way was naturally to probe the mysterious Fenxiang Valley. Just that the current situation, there seemed to be more than meets the eye, not to mention that the southern barbaric tribes had always been extremely mysterious. Just this Fenxiang Valley alone, its power was not to be underestimated. The people who came out from Fenxiang Valley, Li Sun, Yan Hong and the rest, including that elder Lu Shun, their skills were all extremely high. Jean Pinger slowly walked to Ghostly, raised her head and looked at him, smiled and said, "Is Gongzi thinking of probing Fenxiang Valley at night?" Ghost Li's eyes flashed, said, "Why, Miss also has the same intention?" Jean Pinger smiled, charming and moving, there seemed to be a beauty in front of him. Ghost Li's mind was actually moved. His heart could not help but be shocked. Jean Pinger indifferently said, "I am naturally willing to make this trip with Gongzi, just that there is one thing, I hope Gongzi will agree to it." Ghost Li's gaze froze, said, "What?" Jean Pinger smiled and said, "I only hope Gongzi will not be like how you dealt with Qin Huiyan, suddenly kill me from the side." Chapter 210. The southern border mountain peaks were completely different from the Central Plains mountains, less elegant and serene, more lofty and precipitous. Under the night sky, undulating mountain ranges towered majestically, crisscrossing each other. Looking from afar, it exuded an austere air. Ghostly clasped his hands behind his back, gazed into the distance, separated by two lower mountain tops. Behind a rather flat wilderness, four lofty peaks suddenly rose from the ground, linked together, encircling a valley. Behind these four lofty peaks, under the vast night sky, were innumerable shadows. It was the southern border boundless 10,000 great mountains. And at the forefront of the four peaks was the world-renowned Fenxiang Valley. This night, the night was deep, the serene moon hanging high, a few stars glimmering indistinctly in the horizon. Under that cold, clear moonlight, there seemed to be a faint mist in the distant valley, faintly drifting, like a fine veil of mist. In the serene beauty carried some mysteriousness. Ghostly frowned, looked away. It was already the third day, ever since that night 3 days ago. He and evil sect Hehuan sect Jean Pinger suddenly discovered that Fenxiang Valley seemed to be secretly colluding with the southern barbarian tribes in the southern border 10,000 great mountains and decided to secretly investigate Fenxiang Valley. Fenxiang Valley, these 3 words in the southern border, naturally pierced the ears like thunder. Both of them easily found out where Fenxiang Valley was. But when they really wanted to sneak in, they discovered that things were rather troublesome. Fenxiang Valley occupied a vast area. Logically it should not be difficult to sneak in. And it was indeed so. Both of them with their own skills, easily avoided the Fenxiang Valley ordinary disciples who were on guard day and night but who knew that every time they reached a relatively deep part of Fenxiang Valley, no matter how they hid themselves, an inexplicable clear bell sound would be heard nearby, immediately attracting numerous Fenxiang Valley disciples to search carefully. Among them were not ordinary experts. Ghostly and Jean Pinger were alert people. A few times they were early and retreated in time, but no matter how careful they were, they still could not avoid this inexplicable bell sound. After a few days, they were still unable to penetrate deep. Fenxiang Valley instead seemed to be on alert, and had already sent more people to patrol day and night. Ghostly pondered for a long while but still could not figure out how Fenxiang Valley managed to predict their whereabouts. Seemed like this Fenxiang Valley, one of the 3 great sects of the good faction, was indeed a place of crouching tigers and hidden dragons. At this moment, Xiao Hui, who had been quietly lying on his shoulder, suddenly moved. A low voice was heard from behind. "Ah!" Ghostly turned and saw in a small open space in the forest, a fire was lit. Jean Pinger sat in front, holding a wooden stick in her hand. On the stick was a freshly washed wild rabbit being roasted. At this moment, she furrowed her brows and looked at the wooden stick in her hand, looking rather dejected. Ghostly walked over. These 3 days, he and Jean Pinger had tried several times to sneak into Fenxiang Valley, but all ended in failure, and their relationship was rather subtle. On the surface they appeared to be at peace, but secretly they were on guard against each other. Both knew that the other party was a scheming and ruthless person. Nobody knew if the other party would suddenly make a killing move. Walking nearer to the bonfire, Xiao Hui on his shoulder called out, jumped down to the ground. Ghostly looked at Jean Pinger, couldn't help but was stunned. She looked helplessly at the wild rabbit skewered on the wooden stick in her hand. One of the rabbit's legs was actually burnt. Both of them had been wandering around Fenxiang Valley for a few days, in this kind of wilderness. Naturally there were no villages or inns around. After a few days of eating rations, Ghostly was fine, but Jean Pinger could not take it anymore. That night, she happened to see a wild rabbit running past and conveniently caught it, making a fire to have a change of taste. Anyway, their location was quite far from Fenxiang Valley, and they were not afraid of being discovered. Just that, looking at it now, although Jean Pinger's skills were high, but she had never had this kind of wild barbecue experience. After a few times, she did not master her technique properly and actually roasted the food until it was burnt black. This time Ghostly stood in front, Xiao Hui half crouched on the ground, one human and one monkey, 4 eyes all landed on that burnt rabbit's leg. Jean Pinger's face actually turned red, slowly retracted the wooden stick and left the fire. Zhi. Suddenly, a strange sound. It was the monkey Xiao Hui laughing loudly, crouching on the ground. Its tail stood up high, swaying to and fro, its right hand clenched into a fist, continuously hammering the ground. As if it could not bear it, it actually made an unimaginable action. Jean Pinger and Ghostly were stunned at the same time. After a moment both recovered. Jean Pinger was shocked and a trace of anger flashed past her face. Ghostly too did not know where did this monkey learn to ridicule others without rhyme or reason, even though it was rare for it to leave him. Ghostly did not know from where did this monkey learn this skill of ridiculing others. He glanced at Jean Pinger, coughed once, his left leg kicked lightly, kicking the monkey who was still hammering the ground incessantly. Xiao Hui rolled away like a gourd, but the sounds were still heard from afar. Ghostly and Jean Pinger looked at each other. The atmosphere became awkward. Ghostly looked at the wooden stick in Jean Pinger's hand and then moved a rock over, sat on it, said to Jean Pinger, "Give it to me." Jean Pinger was surprised. Ghostly's face was indifferent, stretched his hand to take the stick, first tore off the burnt part and then placed it back on the fire, slowly turning it over to roast. His way of barbecuing was naturally very different from Jean Pinger. The flames swallowed and spat out, the wooden stick gently turned. After a short while, a faint fragrance gradually spread out. Jean Pinger looked up and glanced at him, saw that under the light, his usually pale face had turned rosy. In his deep black eyes, 2 balls of small burning flames were reflected in his eyes. A man who was concentrating on barbecuing for her. In the air, it suddenly became silent. No one spoke. Jean Pinger slowly looked away, picked up a few dried branches and placed it into the fire. The fire gradually burned up, drowning the branches. From time to time sounds of the branches exploding were heard. In the distant treetops, there seemed to be a night breeze blowing past. The rustling sounds of branches and leaves landed on one's heart. Xiao Hui had run back again, a few wild fruits in its hands, seemed like it had just run into the forest to pluck them. It walked to the fire, looked around, sat down beside Ghostly's feet, brought the fruits to its mouth, opened its mouth and started to chew. At the same time its long tail swayed and finally gently wrapped around Ghostly's leg. And like that, after a long time in silence, the fragrance in the air became thicker. That wild rabbit on top of the fire gradually oozed out oil, slowly dripping down, looking glossy. With one look it made one's appetite rise. Jean Pinger could not help but take a few more glances. After a while, Ghostly carefully assessed the rabbit, kept the wooden stick, with one hand holding it, the other stretched to his waist. After a while he took out a few small bottles and cans, sprinkled something that looked like powder on the rabbit's body. Jean Pinger was surprised, said, "What is this?" Ghostly smiled. Jean Pinger looked at him, for some reason felt that he had some bitterness. Ghostly indifferently said, "Just some salt and seasoning, it's an old habit, I always bring it with me wherever I go." After speaking, he passed the wooden stick to Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger hesitated for a moment but did not take it. Ghostly's eyes flashed, smiled indifferently, tore a piece of rabbit meat and put it into his mouth. Jean Pinger blushed in the fire. A coquettish look flashed in her eyes, captivating one's soul. After a while she stretched out her hand to take the stick, quietly said, "Many thanks, Gongzi." Ghostly did not speak, turned his head and conveniently took a wild fruit from Xiao Hui, put it to his mouth, slowly took a bite and started to eat. "Yeah." Suddenly, Jean Pinger gave a soft cry, seemed to carry a little pain. Ghostly and the monkey Xiao Hui looked up at her at the same time, saw Jean Pinger's fair hand covering her mouth, her eyebrows slightly frowning, indistinctly showing pain. Just that she suddenly realized Ghostly and Xiao Hui were looking over, her face blushed and after a long while embarrassedly said, "I was not careful and was scalded." Towards the end, her voice gradually became softer. Ghostly heard it, the corner of his mouth twitched but his expression did not change. Just that Xiao Hui beside his feet suddenly made a sound, in the sounds it grinned, the wild fruit in its right hand dropped to the ground and then it clenched its fist and hammered the ground, seemed like it wanted to do that strange posture again. Jean Pinger's eyes froze, her heart was ashamed and angry but before she could react, before Xiao Hui's hand hammered the ground, Ghostly had already lightly kicked. Xiao Hui like a rolling gourd was kicked out. After a while, Ghostly indifferently said, "The beast is not sensible, don't take it to heart." Jean Pinger glanced at him, composed herself, nodded with a smile and then gently blew at the roasted rabbit beside her, and then used her white shallot-like fingers to tear a small piece of meat from it, put it into her mouth and started chewing. Once it entered her mouth, Jean Pinger immediately perked up, instantly felt that the fragrance seemed to have spirituality, spread throughout her body seemed to become lighter, her mouth was full of saliva. This taste was something she had never tasted before. The skin on the outside was crispy but not burnt, thin but fragrant. The meat inside was smooth and tender, with the addition of the seasoning that she did not know how, the delicacy seemed to seep into her heart and spleen. This taste made her unable to stop, almost lost in thought. She never would have thought that this delicacy was made by this man in front of her. Even with Jean Pinger's profound skills and strong will, right now her appetite was also whetted. She tore piece after piece. In a short while, she had already eaten a rabbit leg. Only then did she feel somewhat full and stopped. Following which she smiled and looked at Ghostly, said, "Gongzi's skills are really good. An ordinary rabbit can actually be roasted to such a delicacy by you." At this time the monkey Xiao Hui had already ran back, crouched beside Ghostly, a pair of extremely agile monkey eyes darting around, for a moment looking at Ghostly, for a moment looking at Jean Pinger. Ghostly indifferently said, "Insignificant skill, I have let Miss see a joke." Jean Pinger smiled sweetly, her countenance charming, her eyes watery, gently said, "In my entire life, I have never eaten such a delicious rabbit." Chapter 211. Ghostly smiled faintly, was about to say something but his body suddenly shook, a perplexed look in his eyes. This sentence, this voice, this smile, suddenly surged in his mind. The night was dim, the night wind cold. His heart suddenly felt pain, like a raging sea wave rolling. Once upon a time, he had actually heard these words before. Those were the dust-laden memories from many years ago, but inadvertently gushed up in his mind. A clear brook, the glimmering light, the smile, the gentle sound of the wind, Kongsang Mountain, behind the cliff, the two who had just escaped death, surrounded the fire, also barbecuing. that smiling, water-green attired figure, suddenly drowned him, occupied all the space in his heart. He could not help but tremble. Baiao! Very delicious, the most delicious thing I have ever eaten in my life, is this rabbit that you are barbecuing now. That sentence, faintly reverberated in his mind, slowly became a thorn, became a needle, piercing into his heart. Gongzi, Gongzi? A slightly surprised voice rang beside his ear, pulled Ghostly back to reality. Jean Pinger had stood up, her left hand still holding that wooden stick, but her right hand, for some reason, had shrunk into her sleeve. Ghostly's gaze froze, took a deep breath, calmed his mind and immediately said, "I am fine." Jean Pinger looked deeply at him. The expression in her eyes fluctuated, softly said, "Gongzi, why is your face so pale, what's the matter?" Ghostly looked straight at her eyes, suddenly smiled and said, "What can happen to me?" Jean Pinger looked at him, the indistinct glint in her eyes slowly receded, her charming countenance surfaced again, smiled and said, "It's good that Gongzi is fine." Ghostly suddenly felt a wave of vexation but did not show it on his face. He was about to say something when Xiao Hui, who had been quiet all along, suddenly moved and looked back. Ghostly and Jean Pinger seemed to sense something at the same time, stood up and looked towards the south, in the southern horizon, above the tranquil Fenxiang Valley surrounded by mountains. Suddenly a sharp whistle was heard, a red light shot up to the sky, after illuminating the horizon, it slowly descended. Ghostly and Jean Pinger's eyes brightened at the same time. In Fenxiang Valley, the lights which were extinguished because of the deep night, one by one lit up. The voices of men, near and far, mingled with the low, angry curses of those who had been disturbed in their sleep, gradually rose. But in this gradually growing hubbub, angry shouts mixed with strange beast-like roars, from the entrance of Fenxiang Valley, traveled in. A moment later, the sounds of fighting could be heard. At the same time, the crisp sound of a bell and the sound of an alarm reverberated above the valley. In the middle of the night, there was actually an external enemy attacking Fenxiang Valley. Arriving without a sound, Ghostly and Jean Pinger, who were hiding on another hill, looked at the lights at the entrance of Fenxiang Valley, and the figures rushing out from Fenxiang Valley from time to time, were secretly shocked. Who exactly was it, dared to so brazenly offend one of the world's good faction leaders, Fenxiang Valley? Even the two of them who were the new generation's most outstanding experts, facing the hidden dragons and crouching tigers in Fenxiang Valley, they could only consider if they could sneak in. Originally, when they had just arrived, Jean Pinger could not help but softly asked, "Don't tell me it is your Ghost King sect?" Ghostly naturally denied it, but no matter how he thought about it, he really could not think of any other power in the world other than the evil faction, which other power would be so arrogant and daring. In the night, the hubbub in Fenxiang Valley, after a while, there were still figures rushing towards the valley entrance. Looking at the situation not only did not calm down, instead it seemed to be worsening. Ghostly and Jean Pinger frowned slightly, but this was after all a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Ghostly softly spoke to Jean Pinger beside him, "Let's go in." Jean Pinger nodded her head, but she glanced at Ghostly and said, "I am very interested in the situation at the valley entrance. Why don't we take advantage of the chaos to take a look?" Ghostly pondered for a moment, shook his head and said, "You go ahead, I will go deeper into Fenxiang Valley to take a look." Jean Pinger seemed stunned in the darkness and then said, "All right, then you be careful." Ghostly was slightly surprised, for Jean Pinger to suddenly say be careful. It seemed strange, but Jean Pinger met his gaze, smiled sweetly. Suddenly her figure turned into a faint light, quietly slid down the mountain ridge. The next moment she disappeared into the darkness. Ghostly frowned, a glint flashed past his eyes. Fenxiang Valley's history until now, although it could not be compared to Qin Yun's sect and the evil faction, but it had already been operating for more than 800 years. Ghostly quietly snuck in the shadows of the night. What greeted him were buildings with picturesque disorder of palaces and pavilions. Looking at the architectural style, It was rather similar to the central plains, but in the minute details, like the window lintel and eaves, there were some ferocious beast carvings, which the central plains did not have. Clearly in these 800 years, Fenxiang Valley had also been influenced by the southern border's local rough customs. At the valley entrance, it was still bustling. That kind of alarm that gave Ghostly and Jean Pinger the most headache was also ringing incessantly. The place where he was carefully hiding was at the foot of the mountain, in the shadow behind a large rock. The last time he sneaked in, it was also from here, a few more steps forward. Immediately that inexplicable clear ringing sounded. Right now he could hear the ringing from afar. 3 zhangs in front of the large rock was an empty space, and then there was an ordinary-looking house. It looked like the residence of Fenxiang Valley disciple. Ghostly inhaled a deep breath, straightened his body in the shadows, looked around. The surroundings were quiet. Compared to the noises far away, it was even quieter. As for the Fenxiang Valley disciple in that house, seemed to have been summoned to the valley entrance. In this strange silence, Ghostly unhurriedly walked forward. 1 step, 2 steps. He walked very slowly, until he had taken 5 steps. The surroundings were still as usual. But the expression on Ghostly's face was even more solemn, because the last time he was here, it was when he took the 6th step, he was discovered by that strange ringing. The glint in his eyes gradually brightened. He slowly swept his gaze around, but saw that there was still no change. The next moment, he slowly took the 6th step. Ding-ling, almost at the same time his foot touched the ground, a clear ringing suddenly rang ahead. In the silence, it spread far and wide. Ghostly's body stiffened, his heart filled with shock and anger. This Fenxiang Valley's ghost skills were so powerful, but he could not discover it. It was really strange. But tonight's situation was naturally different from the past few days. Although Ghostly had triggered some invisible mechanism and sounded the alarm, but the noises and fighting noises were even more intense. In a short while, the ringing drowned out the ringing. Ghostly made a prompt decision, swept his gaze around and then flew up, sticking close to the ground, and skimmed to the back of the house in front. Just that the ringing was still ringing non-stop. It was really a headache. And at this moment, the monkey Xiao Hui, who had been quietly crouching on Ghostly's shoulder, suddenly called out. Ghostly was startled, turned his head and glanced at Xiao Hui on his shoulder. Reflecting the faint moonlight in the night, in front of Ghostly, who was in the shadows, Xiao Hui's body suddenly emitted a slight caw-caw sound, and then that gray scar on its forehead, its color seemed to darken. Before Ghostly could react, Xiao Hui, who seemed to feel something was wrong, suddenly turned its head. A pair of monkey eyes suddenly lit up with a strange threatening golden light, but behind that patch of golden, indistinctly a trace of strange red. Zhi. Xiao Hui's monkey hand suddenly pointed to the foundation at a remote corner of the house. Ghostly carried Xiao Hui down, carefully assessed it, quietly said, "What is it, Xiao Hui?" Zhi. Xiao Hui called out softly, its hand still pointing at that direction. At the same time the golden light in its eyes slowly dimmed. Ghostly frowned and then nodded, placed it on his shoulder. His body immediately drifted over. The dark corner of the foundation faintly emitted the smell of moss. Under Ghostly's careful search, very soon he found a small hole about 1 chi in size, hidden in the foundation. A glint flashed in his eyes, stretched out his hand, suddenly as fast as lightning. A low cry was heard from the hole and then immediately quietened down. Almost at the same time, the incessant ringing of the bell also suddenly stopped. A trace of smile appeared on Ghostly's lips. He unhurriedly pulled his hand out. The next moment, in his hand there was a strange wild beast, struggled for a while, and then stopped moving. This strange beast was covered in gray skin, about 3 chi long. Its body was in a strange bow shape, its back towering high, head and tail drooping low, a pair of small black bean-like eyes embedded in its head. But the strangest thing was that this beast had an unusually long nose. It was about half a foot long, almost a third of its body length. There were two thick nostrils at the front of its nose, making it look like a pig raised in a farmer's house. Ghostly was stunned for a moment and then snorted, softly muttered, "No wonder I said we can't hide no matter what, there is actually this grey dolphin, Note 1, here." Note 1. Divine and Evil G.E. Spiritual Beasts Chapter Grey Dolphin. Long nose, big ears, necklace, long tail, eats ants, insects and grass roots, nocturnal, also known as aardvark. Also note. Modern animals, aardvark. Mammal, also known as African anteater, strong body, about 140 centimeters long, without incisors and canines, like anteater, uses its long tongue to eat termites. Lives in southern and central Africa, appearing in hilly or semi-grassland areas, very good at digging, rests in caves during the day, and comes out at night to forage for food. Very timid, exceptionally sensitive hearing, relies on smell to find food. Its sense of smell is more than 10 times that of a dog. Chapter 2:12. Ghostly threw the already dead grey pig at the corner of the wall and carefully examined the hole where the grey pig was at. As expected, he discovered an extremely thin string leading out from the hole, connected to a bell far away. Most likely in the past few days, his and Jean Pinger's repeated failed attempts were all discovered by this small grey pig. He had once read about it in the Ghost King Sect's secret manual, Strange Divine and Evil Tales. The grey pig's nose was extremely sensitive, far better than any ordinary creature in the world. These few days he had been thinking of ways to conceal himself, but he did not expect to be discovered by this small beast. Just that although he understood this point, but Ghost Lee's brows still frowned, stood in the dark corner of the wall and pondered for a moment. Grey pig, this kind of strange beast, although it was not considered an ancient celestial beast but it was rare in the world. It was only heard that it only existed in a certain forest deep in the southern border 10,000 great mountains. Funsiang Valley actually had this beast, and these few days when he tried to enter Funsiang Valley from various places but was discovered without exception, the number of grey pigs in Funsiang Valley was not little. It was really shocking. But the most crucial point was, to tame so many grey pigs at the same time to such a degree, this kind of beast-taming skill, not to mention the Central Plains good faction, even the evil sect had never heard of it before. Instead, in the legends, it was said that among the southern border barbarian tribes, there was this kind of skill. Ghostly raised his eyes and turned around, looked ahead and suddenly discovered, in the hubbub far away, Funsiang Valley was still a stretch of tranquility, the heavy darkness like a black curtain, shrouding above, not knowing how many secrets were hidden. The hubbub at the valley entrance gradually quietened down, only loud voices could be heard from afar, but the sounds of fighting had completely disappeared. Seemed like Funsiang Valley was already gradually controlling the situation. Who exactly was it, dared to openly provoke Funsiang Valley? Ghostly withdrew his gaze from the valley entrance. Jean Pinger's figure unconsciously flashed past his mind. This mysterious seductive lady, most likely was still in that chaos. Right now, Ghostly had already entered deep into Funsiang Valley from that hidden corner. Along the way, there were no more alarm sounds triggered by the grey pig. Most likely Funsiang Valley distributed these sensitive little beasts to the various corners of the valley. Once they reached the middle of the valley, they would not have to worry about these. In the deep night, the valley which had just calmed down from the hubbub seemed especially serene, following Ghost Lee's ghost-like figure drifting along the paths of the pavilions in the valley. The world under the black curtain also gradually revealed. Funsiang Valley was known as the world's good faction pillar, although they usually kept a low profile, but it was after 800 years of prosperity. In the night, several paths, some big and some small, connected to each other, several paths like a person, scattered deep into Funsiang good sect or sect. On both sides of the road were either the residences of ordinary disciples or tall and majestic palaces. Mixed in between these buildings were mostly flowers and trees. There were green bamboos, winter plum blossoms, and bright and magnificent peonies and peonies. They formed groups of each other and looked at each other from afar. They blended well with the surrounding palaces and actually had their own unique flavor. Because of the hubbub, although it was late at night but there were still Funxiang Valley disciples moving about, Ghostly had to carefully conceal himself to avoid exposing himself. But these disciples' expressions seemed to be very calm, without the shock at the beginning of the hubbub. He knew that the situation at the valley entrance had already been settled. These few Funxiang Valley disciples moving about naturally did not pose a problem to Ghostly. For the past 10 years, he had Buddhism, evil, Taoism, 3 sects cultivation ways, with the strange mysterious Tian Shu as his foundation. His cultivation speed was unimaginable. Even the erudite Ghost King was astonished, puzzled after much thought. In the end he could only attribute it to this Buddhism and Taoism dual cultivation. Maybe there was a secret enhancement. Just that Ghostly was hiding in the dark, although he did not think much of these ordinary Funxiang Valley disciples, but the several paths in front of him gave him a real headache, not knowing where to go. This time he sneaked into Funxiang Valley, with his own selfish intention, was to find out what secrets this Funxiang Valley actually had. It would be best if he could find out the relationship with those southern barbaric tribes. To know these, naturally he needed to head to the places where those important figures were in Funxiang Valley, just that these paths looked like a maze, really giving him a headache. Just when Ghostly was frowning in deep thought, considering if he should capture a Funxiang Valley disciple to interrogate, suddenly there was a movement on his shoulder. Xiao Hui's soft moaning was heard. Ghostly was shocked, turned his head to look. His body couldn't help but trembled. The monkey Xiao Hui was grabbing tightly onto his clothes. The monkey's face contorted, both eyes tightly closed, seemed to be in pain, just that it was after all intelligent and had human nature, knew that now was not the time and so endured it. Ghostly's shock was no small matter. For some reason, ever since they entered the valley, Xiao Hui seemed to feel something was wrong. Looking at it now, its body seemed to be in some kind of great pain. Stretching out his hand, he gently carried Xiao Hui down. Ghostly carefully assessed it, felt the monkey's body trembling in his hands. Obviously it was using all its strength to resist that unknown pain. Ghostly was even more worried, quietly said, "What is it, Xiao Hui?" As if it had heard its master's words, Xiao Hui's head tilted, slowly opened its eyes. Golden with a faint dark red glow, like the demonic ghost fire in the night, even more like the strange demonic eye from the 9 Nether, appeared before Ghostly. The surrounding temperature seemed to have suddenly turned cold. Xiao Hui's breathing sounds slowly started to increase. Ghostly clearly felt the monkey's claws grabbing onto his hands. That strength was getting stronger and stronger, deeply engraved into his muscles. The monkey's mouth slowly opened and closed, but the strange golden light in its eyes was staring intently at Ghostly, not relaxing for even a moment. From within, Ghostly suddenly felt a trace of familiarity, the same bloodthirsty gaze that he had when he went crazy. In that instant, Ghostly suddenly felt his entire body turning cold, abruptly turned his head, looked at his hand in his sleeve, without knowing since when, the sinister orb at the tip of the soul-absorbing stick emitted a faint green glow with a hint of blood. Sinister orb, this world's most ferocious and most evil thing, was actually so strange, as if it suddenly emerged from the depths of his heart. Ghostly in that instant felt a bitter taste in his mouth. He blankly turned his head and looked at Xiao Hui. Xiao Hui also seemed to have felt something and softly called out twice. Ghostly composed himself and then discovered behind the golden glow in Xiao Hui's eyes there seemed to be a trace of panic. He inhaled deeply and revealed a smile on his lips, softly said, "It's all right." Xiao Hui seemed to understand its master's words. Its eyes blinked and slowly closed. After a moment, as if that inexplicable pain was gradually subsiding, the strength in Xiao Hui's claws also gradually lessened. Ghostly stood in the darkness, slowly embraced Xiao Hui in his arms. The night was as cold as water. In the darkness ahead, A man and a monkey figures, in the dark corner of the night, gently flashed. After standing for a long time, Xiao Hui seemed to have fallen asleep, quietly crouched in Ghost Li's arms. Ghost Li did not even care that this was Fenxiang Valley dangerous place, standing in the darkness, gently hugged the monkey. Suddenly, Xiao Hui's body in his arms moved, its head lifted up. Ghost Li looked down, the golden glow in the monkey's eyes had already disappeared, it had reverted to its usual lively look. Ghost Li heaved a sigh of relief, but before he could say anything, Xiao Hui seemed to struggle for a moment and then pointed its arm towards a path outside. Ghost Li was surprised, looked up, and after a while, indeed 2 people walked over from that path. They were people that Ghost Li recognized. Li Sun and Yan Hong. Ghost Li frowned. He had known these 2 for 10 years, they were both outstanding talents, although in these 10 years the world had changed, and they had not met again, but for a cultivator, 10 years was just a blink of a finger. Both of their expressions and looks were almost the same as 10 years ago, just that looking at their movements, most likely their skills were also incomparable to that time. Both of them slowly walked over, seemed to be talking to each other. When they neared, Yan Hong was heard saying, "Senior brother, why did those monsters suddenly charge in?" Li Sun frowned, clearly did not understand, but looking at his cold face, he coldly said, "Those uncivilized beasts, who knows what they are thinking? If I had to say, these human fish dares to invade the valley, we should make sure they never return. Why bother Shangguan teacher uncle?" Chapter 213. Yan Hong softly said, "Senior brother, don't be angry, Valley Master has deep foresight, there must be something that we are not aware of. When we were negotiating with those barbarians, it was Shangguan teacher uncle who displayed his supernatural powers to intimidate them. Those barbarians saw him as a celestial being. As long as he appeared, those monsters would definitely leave obediently. Valley Master asked us to invite Shangguan teacher uncle out, it must be because of this." Li Sun snorted, said, "I naturally know about these, but I just don't understand, with our Fenxiang Valley's prestige, why do we have to humble ourselves to those monsters, and now we still have to invite Shangguan teacher uncle out. If this matter spreads out, won't our Fenxiang Valley become the world's good faction laughingstock?" Yan Hong smiled and said, "Senior brother, I think these barbarians still have some use, so Valley Master tolerated them. In the future—" Speaking till here, she suddenly stopped, but her eyes looked at Li Sun, as if she had thousands of words to say. Li Sun's lips curled, a trace of dissatisfaction on his handsome face. Looking from afar, it seemed to add a few degrees of elegance. But he did not say anything more, only sighed softly, with Yan Hong unhurriedly walked onto a small path, after a while, disappeared into the night. In the shadows, a gaze as sharp as a knife watched their backs. Ghost Li's thoughts turned quickly. The ones who invaded Fenxiang Valley tonight were actually those human fish tribes that he was investigating. Recalling that night 3 days ago, he overheard Lu Shun and that human fish talking. That tall human fish seemed to be the tribe leader. It seemed like tonight's matter, most likely because that human fish tribe leader was killed by Jean Pinger. The remaining human fish tribe came in anger to seek revenge. Thinking of that, Jean Pinger's figure involuntarily flashed past Ghost Li's mind. His wariness towards this girl increased by another level. He stood in the shadows for a moment and then seemed to make a decision, looked at Xiao Hui in his arms. Xiao Hui's eyes blinked, suddenly its body moved, scurried up his shoulder, grinned, seemed to have completely recovered. Ghost Li was assured, smiled faintly and said, "Let's go see what kind of person that Shangguan teacher uncle is. What do you think?" Xiao Hui called out twice, with a wave of its monkey hand. It pointed to the path that Li Sun and Yan Hong had taken. Ghost Li laughed soundlessly in the darkness. His figure suddenly rose, fast like a ghost, headed towards that secluded path. In the distance, a Fenxiang Valley disciple was walking over here, suddenly felt a blur in front of him. It seemed like there was a ghost figure flashing past on the path leading to the important place in the valley, Inferno Altar. When he looked carefully, he did not see anything, couldn't help but was stunned for a moment and then shook his head, mumbled a sentence and continued to walk forward, not taking it to heart. The path was quiet, but it was unexpectedly long. Obviously that Shangguan teacher uncle's place was very secluded. Ghostly did not walk far on this road, and there were no other houses around. Both sides of the road were trees and flowers. The night breeze blew over. Under the dim moonlight in the horizon, the shadows of the trees swayed, looked like some demons dancing, revealing a trace of strangeness. Ghostly carefully walked along this path. After walking for a while, he did not see any crossroads like outside. Seemed like this was a path that led directly to where that Shangguan teacher uncle was. Fenxiang Valley occupied a huge area. This small path looked like it was winding and meandering, led deep into the valley. Suddenly, an object appeared ahead, a white square. Ghostly's eyes focused, looked at it. It was a stone tablet. On it were 2 rows of characters. Inferno Ground disciple. Stop. Ghostly frowned, not because of the mystery of Fenxiang Valley ahead which made him hesitate, but because these 2 words, Inferno Ground, quietly stirred a place in his heart. He could not help but glance at his right arm. Under his clothes, Inferno Mirror was quietly lying on his arm. He was stunned for a moment and then sneered, lifted his feet and walked past this stone tablet. That stone tablet although looked ordinary, but it seemed to be a demarcation point. After passing the stone tablet, for some reason, although the small path was still winding and extending forward, but the trees and flowers on both sides of the path evidently became sparse. First the green grass on the ground gradually disappeared, then the short shrubs and finally even the dense trees on both sides also gradually became sparse, not to mention the ground started to crack. Even the remaining few trees, their trunks and branches also became a patch of withered yellow, as if there was an extreme lack of water nearby and they were scorched. Not sure if it was related to those 2 words, Inferno Ground? Xiao Hui on his shoulder quietly called out. Its body also moved, seemed to be uneasy. Ghostly gently patted its body. Xiao Hui then gradually calmed down. The surrounding scene was indeed very strange, but it did not look like there was any important place in Fenxiang Valley. If not, along the way, he did not even see a single disciple guarding. Ghostly's thoughts turned, following the small path, turned the last bend. Suddenly, even with his composure, his body could not help but trembled. In front of him appeared a large empty space. A gust of heat wave blew over from nowhere. In the middle of the empty space was an enormous circular altar, the bottom suspended in the air. 13 enormous stone pillars made of white jade, 3 zhangs tall, supported the entire altar. At the edge of the altar, there were a total of 12 white jade stone pillars, each one as thick as 2 people's arms would need to encircle it, and in the middle of the altar, the thickest white jade stone pillar looked like it would need at least 5 or 6 people's arms to encircle it. And above the altar, all the structures were built with a kind of scarlet-red strange stone. The stairs and railings were all the same. In the middle of the altar stood a tall and majestic hall, in the shape of a pagoda, a total of 3 levels. Each higher level was about half the size of the one below, but each level looked to be an unbelievable 10 zhangs high. Looking from afar, this altar was like an enormous burning scarlet-red flame, piercing the firmament. Ghostly standing below this altar seemed like an ant, extremely tiny. Ghostly inhaled deeply. The structure before him was really astonishing. The 4 words superlative workmanship. Most likely it was fully deserving of its name. Unexpectedly in Fenxiang Valley, there was such a magnificent structure. He pondered in his heart. After a moment he thought of that stone tablet which he had just entered. He vaguely knew that this place, most likely, was the legendary Fenxiang Valley's famed place, Inferno Altar. He composed himself and then quietly floated over. Other than the Inferno Altar in front of him, there was nothing else around. There was no cover at all. But luckily there were no guards around and his movements were fast. In a blink he had reached the bottom of the inferno altar. Once he neared this inferno altar, the heat in the air immediately rose by more than a few times, even with Ghost Lee's level of cultivation. He also felt a wave of irritation, beads of perspiration appeared on his forehead. Ghostly frowned, was secretly shocked and then remembered. He did not know if Xiao Hui could withstand this scorching heat. He turned his head and saw Xiao Hui on his shoulder scratching its head and ears, as if ignoring the surrounding heat. Ghostly was surprised, subconsciously felt that Xiao Hui was not normal recently, especially after swallowing the rare elixirs and stones in the Celestial Emperor treasury on that celestial tree in the Death Marsh. Its body had obviously started to gradually change. But no matter what, in this situation, Xiao Hui not being afraid of the heat was naturally much better than being afraid of it. Ghostly temporarily did not have the mood to care so much. He was pondering if his next step should be to go up this inferno altar. Suddenly footsteps were heard from above the inferno altar. Ghostly frowned, glanced around, but there was no place to hide. After pondering for a moment, he flew below the inferno altar and hid behind a thick white jade pillar. He hid behind the pillar, subconsciously stretched out his hand to touch the pillar. Suddenly his hand felt hot. With his quick reaction, he immediately pulled his hand back. Below this inferno altar, even the stone pillar was boiling hot. The footsteps became louder, evidently someone was coming down. Suddenly an old voice was heard, unhurriedly said, "Since Valley Master has invited me, I naturally have to go, just that you all better tell me, why did those human fish people suddenly become so violent, to the extent that they want to attack the valley?" Ghostly hid in the shadow of the pillar, looked out, saw Li Sun and Yan Hong following behind a gray-attired elder, walking down respectfully. Chapter 214. Ghostly watched from the dark, saw that elder's face was thin, dressed in a gray robe, simple and unadorned, his mannerisms calm, did not have any outstanding features. If he was walking on the streets of an ordinary town, most likely no one would be able to tell that he was a cultivator. But looking at the expressions of the two behind him, not to mention Yan Hong, even the arrogant Li Sun seemed to be very respectful to this ordinary elder, did not dare to slight him. Right now, hearing that elder's question, Li Sun hesitated for a moment and then said, "Teacher uncle, please understand, actually it is because those merfolk barbarian tribe leaders died an unnatural death, so these monsters went berserk, that's why." The three of them had just walked down from the altar. The elder frowned, indifferently said, "How did the merfolk tribe leaders die?" Li Sun with a bitter laugh, shook his head. Yan Hong said, reporting to teacher uncle, that merfolk tribe leader was 3 days ago, after meeting Lu Shun teacher uncle at Higu Mountain nameless ancient temple, less than a mile away from the ancient temple. He was suddenly killed by an expert. The gray-clothed old man exclaimed in surprise and said, "Who's the culprit?" Li Sun shook his head, said, "We have been investigating for several days, still have no leads." Speaking until here, he seemed to hesitate for a moment and then continued, "Actually this matter should have been reported to teacher uncle long ago, just that Valley Head remembered that teacher uncle has been guarding the Inferno altar for almost 100 years and has long stopped meddling in worldly affairs, so did not wish to disturb teacher uncle." The elder smiled and said, "Valley Head's good intentions, how can I not know?" Thinking that if not for the fact that these barbarians still have some use and I had some reputation when I subdued them, Valley Head would not wish to trouble this old man. Li Sun smiled embarrassedly and was about to say something, but the gray-clothed old man seemed unwilling to say anything more on this topic, so he changed the topic and said, "Wasn't Lu Shun also present at that time, less than a li away? Could it be that he also couldn't find the murderer? Even if he dug 3 chi into the ground, he would have found it long ago." Li Sun heard it and looked at Yan Hong. Yan Hong hesitated for a moment, softly said, "It has always been that the murderer is too cunning and highly skilled. after one successful strike he immediately escaped, that's why even Lu Shun teacher uncle could not catch him. The gray-clothed old man snorted and didn't say anything else. However, disdain could be felt from his voice and expression. Obviously, he looked down upon the martial uncle Lu Shun that Li Sun and Yan Hong spoke of. The three of them walked and talked, less than 3 zhongs of distance. They had already covered half of it, gradually getting further away from Ghostly. Ghostly slowly calmed down, but his body did not dare to relax. At this moment, he heard that elderly seemed to ask a question from afar. Because he had walked too far, the voice could not be heard clearly, but indistinctly he heard that the elderly was asking about the situation of those rebellious merpeople barbarians. Li Sun behind him replied, "Now the situation has stabilized. Lu Shun teacher uncle led a group of disciples to block those monsters at the valley entrance, and with their supernatural powers, suppressed the human fish people. Now both parties are facing off. Those human fish people kept saying that they want to avenge their tribe leader. Valley Master is also not willing to shed all pretenses with the southern barbarian tribes, so he sent me to invite teacher uncle." Speaking until here, suddenly, a shrill cry was heard from the valley entrance, reverberated far away, the sound extremely mournful. Everyone present was shocked. Li Sun exclaimed, "It seems to be the entrance." Before they could react, the next moment the sounds of fighting and killing were heard again. Angry shouts and shrill cries were heard incessantly. The valley, which had just quietened down, was once again shrouded by the sounds of fighting. The three people's faces changed greatly. The gray-robed old man snorted and waved his sleeve. He immediately turned into a gray light and soared into the sky. He flew swiftly towards the entrance of the valley. Li Sun and Yan Hong also hurriedly followed, until their figures completely disappeared in the night. Ghostly then slowly walked out from the Inferno altar, pondered for a moment, turned around and looked towards the Inferno altar. The huge building before him towered majestically, even a white jade pillar beside it looked so majestic in the night, not to mention the scarlet-red palaces and pavilions above it. Not far ahead was the stairs that the elder, Li Sun and Yan Hong walked down from. Ghostly walked towards the stairs, saw that all the stairs were built with the same strange scarlet-red stone, blended in with the surrounding stone railings. Slowly stepping on it, Ghostly walked up. Right now the surrounding temperature seemed to have risen a lot, as if what he was stepping on was not that kind of scarlet-red stone, but a real burning flame. This Inferno altar stairs went up 36 steps, turned and continued to extend upwards. Ghostly breathed deeply, his face cold, slowly walked up. The surrounding railings and stone walls were plain and unadorned, without any carvings, looking especially simple and unadorned. Right now even the wind blowing from the night sky also became extremely hot. Xiao Hui crouched on Ghostly's shoulder, its eyeballs rolling around, curiously looking around. Finally, after walking up the stairs, a total of 3 levels and 108 steps, Ghostly came to the Inferno altar. Even though he had already seen the scene from far below the Inferno altar, but now that he was on the Inferno altar, standing in front of the towering palace in the middle of the Inferno altar, looking at the enormous building that was taller than him by 100 times, looking at the sharp sword-like spires piercing the sky, Ghostly still couldn't help but feel insignificant. The same scarlet-red stone was cut into huge stones of equal size, each piece almost half a person's height, piled up to form a magnificent palace. Walking nearer, in the hot air, Ghostly clearly saw that these stones were connected so tightly, the gaps in the middle looked like even a blade would not be able to pierce through. He really could not imagine how the ancestors of Fenxiang Valley were able to create such an uncanny craftsmanship of the palace. In fact, he almost had an illusion that what was in front of him was not a hall, but a huge burning flame. Furthermore, the flame was so huge that it seemed as if it would soon overwhelm him and devour his tiny self. Ghostly breathed deeply, composed himself, suppressed the awe in his heart, and then turned his head, carefully looked at the path to enter the Inferno Altar Palace. It didn't take him much effort to find it. The entire tower-like altar did not even have a window. It was completely surrounded by huge scarlet stones. Only at the lowest level, not far from him, there was a 1 zhang tall and 6 qi wide door. Ghostly walked over, very quickly discovered that although this door was painted red, but it was different from the surrounding stone walls. It was a wooden door. Come to think of it, if even the door to enter and exit was also an extremely heavy stone door, it would most likely be very troublesome. Ghostly stood in front of the door for a while, but did not immediately push it open, instead turned and looked behind. The entire Inferno altar, other than the hot air, it was silent. Jia! The next moment, he pushed the door open. Fenxiang Valley entrance. Right now it was already a river of blood. More than 100 tall and strong fish-headed barbarians were wailing, extremely furious, holding all kinds of strange weapons. There were spears, knives, swords and halberds, fighting with the surrounding Fenxiang Valley disciples incessantly. Blood flowed on the ground, broken limbs could be seen everywhere. Among the casualties, there were quite a number of Fenxiang Valley disciples, but most of them were human fish people. As for these broken limbs, most likely they were chopped off by those savage human fish people. But although the scene was terrifying, the human fish people were also incomparably ferocious. But the situation was Fenxiang Valley side gradually suppressing the human fish people, and it looked like Fenxiang Valley side still had some leeway. Several higher-leveled disciples encircled the city in a semicircle, pressing inwards together. Just that these human fish people were really ferocious and their bodies were very different from humans. Even if a cultivator was hit by a Fenxiang Valley disciple's sword light, most likely he would also be injured. But these human fish people, for some reason, their bodies were extremely sturdy, and in addition the Fenxiang Valley disciples seemed to have received some orders, left some leeway, other than a few skilled swords and magical weapons. When the other disciples' magical weapons hit them, the human fish people at most were sent flying. It was extremely difficult to see blood. But firstly, the Fenxiang Valley disciples had been cultivating for many years. Their skills were not shallow. 1-on-1 plus the power of their magical weapons, they still won against these barbarian human fish people. Secondly, these human fish people were only strong and thick-skinned. The Fenxiang Valley disciples advanced and retreated, from time to time flew their swords down and attacked, giving the human fish people a huge headache. They still had the upper hand. And among the Fenxiang Valley disciples, an elderly was commanding. It was Lu Shun whom Ghostly met that day at the desolate mountain ancient temple. Right now his brows were tightly frowning, his expression extremely ugly, clearly extremely furious. The battle was at its climax. Suddenly a tragic cry was heard. It was a Fenxiang Valley disciple who was careless, revealed an opening and was hooked by a human fish person using a weapon that looked like a sickle. His leg was hooked and dragged down from the air, fell onto the ground. The next moment several human fish people swarmed over, weapons danced wildly. In a blink he died a violent death. Even his body was not complete. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.